Emma Clark never imagined that burning a pregnancy test would change her life forever. When she set fire to those two pink lines in her bathroom sink, she thought she was destroying evidence of the biggest mistake she'd ever made. But the father of her unborn child wasn't just any man. He was Dominic Russo, the city's most dangerous crime boss, and he'd been searching for her for months. If you want to see how Emma's world collides with Dominic's ruthless empire, stay until the end, hit that like button, and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. The apartment building's fluorescent hallway lights flickered as Emma Clark fumbled with her keys, 3 plastic grocery bags cutting into her wrists. Her fingers were numb from the February cold, and the climb to the 4th floor had left her breathless in a way that had nothing to do with the stairs. She'd been tired for weeks now, bone-deep exhausted in a way that coffee couldn't fix and sleep didn't cure. Emma finally got the door open and stumbled inside, kicking it shut behind her. The studio apartment was barely 400 square feet, a kitchenette along one wall, a futon that served as both couch and bed, a bathroom the size of a closet, and a single window that looked out onto the brick wall of the building next door. It was all she could afford on a waitress's salary while putting herself through college. She dropped the groceries on the counter and pressed her palms against the cheap laminate, breathing slowly. The nausea that had become her constant companion rolled through her stomach in waves. Not now, please, not now. But her body had other plans. Emma barely made it to the bathroom before she was on her knees in front of the toilet, retching until there was nothing left. When the spasms finally subsided, she sat back against the bathtub, wiping her mouth with shaking hands. This had been going on for 2 weeks. She knew what it meant. Had known from the first morning she'd woken up feeling like death. Had known when her period was 5 days late, then 10, then 2 weeks. But knowing something and facing it were 2 entirely different things. Emma pulled herself up using the sink and stared at her reflection in the medicine cabinet mirror. Dark circles shadowed her green eyes. Her auburn hair hung limp around her face. She looked haunted. You can't keep avoiding this. The pregnancy test she'd bought 3 days ago still sat in its paper bag, shoved behind the toilet. Emma had walked past it a dozen times, pretending it didn't exist. But tonight, standing in the harsh bathroom light with her hands braced on the sink, she knew she'd run out of time for denial. She reached behind the toilet and pulled out the bag. The test was simple. Just pee on a stick and wait 3 minutes. 3 minutes to confirm what she already knew. 3 minutes before her entire life changed forever. Emma's hands trembled as she unwrapped the test. The instructions swam before her eyes. She'd read them 20 times already, had practically memorized them, but fear made her read them again. Just do it. Get it over with. 2 minutes later, she placed the test on the edge of the sink and set a timer on her phone. Then she sat on the closed toilet lid and waited, hugging herself against the cold that seemed to come from inside her bones. The bathroom was silent except for the drip of the leaky faucet and the pounding of her heart. Emma's mind drifted back 3 months, to the night that had led to this moment. She'd been working a double shift at Marco's, the upscale restaurant downtown where she waited tables 4 nights a week. It had been a Friday, the restaurant packed with the city's elite. Businessmen in expensive suits, women dripping in diamonds, people for whom a $200 bottle of wine was nothing. She'd been clearing a table near the bar when she'd first seen him. Even in a room full of wealthy, powerful men, Dominic Russo had stood out. He'd been sitting alone at a corner table, dressed in a black suit that probably cost more than Emma's entire year of tuition. Dark hair, sharp features, and eyes that seemed to see everything. He'd been watching her. Emma had felt his gaze like a physical touch, raising goosebumps on her arms despite the restaurant's warmth. She tried to ignore it, focusing on her work, but when she'd glanced back, he was still staring. Their eyes had met across the crowded room, and something had shifted in the air between them. She'd known who he was, of course. Everyone in the city knew Dominic Russo, even if they didn't advertise the fact. He owned half the legitimate businesses downtown and controlled all of the illegitimate ones. The Russo family had run organized crime in the city for 3 generations, and Dominic was the latest, and reportedly the most ruthless, heir to that empire. Emma should have looked away, should have stayed far away from a man like that. Instead, when her shift ended at midnight, she'd found him waiting by her car in the employee parking lot. "You've been avoiding me all night," he'd said, his voice low and smooth. "I'm working. Emma had replied, trying to sound braver than she felt. Some of us have to. His mouth had curved into something that might have been a smile. I noticed. You're good at your job, efficient. You don't waste time on small talk with customers who don't deserve it. Was there something you wanted? Have a drink with me. I don't think that's a good idea. Why not? Emma had looked at him, really looked at him, and seen the danger in every line of his body. Dominic Russo was not the kind of man you had casual drinks with. He was the kind of man who destroyed lives without losing sleep over it. Because I know who you are, she'd said quietly. Then you know I always get what I want. Not this time. She'd gotten in her car and driven away, hands shaking on the steering wheel, heart racing. She'd thought that would be the end of it, but 2 nights later he'd been back, and the night after that. Always at the same corner table, always watching her with those dark, intense eyes. Never approaching her during her shift, never making demands. Just watching. Waiting. Emma had tried to convince herself she was annoyed, that his presence was unwelcome, his attention unwanted. She'd been lying to herself. There was something magnetic about Dominic Russo, something that pulled at her despite every rational thought in her head screaming that he was dangerous. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, not like the other wealthy customers who barely saw the waitstaff as human, but like she was the only person in the room worth his attention. Maybe it was the intensity in his eyes, the sense that beneath the ruthless reputation was something more complicated. Or maybe she was just lonely enough and tired enough and desperate enough for something beyond her endless routine of school and work and barely scraping by that she wanted to believe a man like him could be interested in someone like her. The 4th time Dominic came to the restaurant, Emma had made a decision that would change everything. When her shift ended, she'd walk to his table instead of to her car. One drink, she'd said, that's all. The smile that had crossed his face had been genuine, transforming him from dangerous to devastating. They'd gone to a bar 3 blocks away, a quiet place with dim lighting and music low enough to talk over. Emma had ordered wine. Dominic had ordered scotch. And they'd talked. Not about his business, he'd deflected every question about what he did, and Emma hadn't pushed. Not about her struggles. She'd been too proud to admit how hard she was working just to stay afloat. Instead, they'd talked about books and music and the city and all the small things that people discuss when they're trying to learn who someone is beneath the surface. Dominic had been different than she'd expected. Yes, there was an edge of danger to him, a sense of carefully controlled power that never quite left. But there was also intelligence and unexpected humor. He'd listened when she spoke, asked questions that showed he was genuinely interested in her answers. 1 drink had turned into 3. 3 drinks had turned into Dominic walking her to her car, his hand warm on the small of her back. And when he'd asked if he could see her again, Emma had said yes before her better judgment could interfere. The phone's timer went off, yanking Emma back to the present. 3 minutes had passed. Her hand shook as she reached for the pregnancy test on the edge of the sink. For a moment, she couldn't make herself look at it. As long as she didn't look, there was still uncertainty, still possibility. But she couldn't hide forever. Emma took a breath and looked down at the test. 2 pink lines, clear as day, unmistakable, pregnant. The test slipped from her fingers and clattered into the sink. Emma gripped the edge of the counter, her breath coming in short gasps. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be real. She and Dominic had been careful. They'd only been together once, one night 2 weeks after that first drink, when the tension between them had finally exploded into something neither of them could control. It had been intense and desperate and unlike anything Emma had ever experienced. And afterward, lying in his arms in a hotel room that probably cost more than her monthly rent, she'd known she was in over her head. So she'd left before dawn, gathering her clothes in the dark and slipping out while Dominic slept. She'd blocked his number, stopped working the shifts when he usually came to the restaurant, done everything she could to put distance between them. Because men like Dominic Russo didn't have relationships. They had possessions, and Emma refused to be owned by anyone, no matter how magnetic he was or how alive she'd felt in his presence. She'd convinced herself it was the right choice, that walking away was the smart thing to do. Now, staring at those 2 pink lines, Emma realized she'd been naive to think one night with Dominic Russo could be consequence-free. Panic rose in her chest, making it hard to breathe. What was she going to do? She could barely afford to take care of herself. How could she possibly manage a baby? And what about school? She was one semester away from graduating with her business degree, one semester away from finally being able to get a better job, a better life. A baby would change everything. Emma's gaze fell on the test in the sink, those two pink lines staring up at her like an accusation. Without thinking, she grabbed the test and her lighter, the one she used for the candles she burned when the apartment felt too empty, and held the flame to the plastic stick. Make it go away. Make it not real. The plastic melted, warping and bubbling. Black smoke curled up from the test. The pink lines blurred and distorted, but they didn't disappear entirely. Nothing could make them disappear. Emma dropped the still smoldering test in the sink and turned on the faucet, washing the evidence down the drain. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely turn off the water. She slid down the bathroom wall until she was sitting on the cold tile floor, her knees drawn up to her chest, and finally let herself cry. For the life she'd never have, for the future that had just crumbled, for the impossibility of the situation she'd found herself in, and for the man she'd run from who could never know about this baby. Emma called in sick to work the next 2 nights. She couldn't face the restaurant, couldn't face the possibility of seeing Dominic if he showed up looking for her. She spent the time in her apartment, alternating between numb denial and waves of panic so intense she couldn't breathe. By the 3rd night, she knew she couldn't hide forever. The rent was due in a week, and she was already behind on her electric bill. She needed the money from her shifts, needed to keep moving forward even as her world fell apart. So she put on her black pants and white button-down shirt, pulled her hair back into a neat bun, and went to work. The restaurant was busy, a private party in the main dining room and the regular dinner crowd filling the rest of the space. Emma moved through her section on autopilot, taking orders and delivering food, and smiling at customers who didn't know her world had just imploded. She was clearing a table near the kitchen when she felt it, that prickling awareness at the back of her neck that meant someone was watching her. Emma's hands stilled on the plates she was stacking. Slowly, she turned. Dominic Russo sat at his usual corner table, wearing a dark gray suit and watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. Even from across the room, she could see the sharpness in his gaze, the tension in his shoulders. He'd been looking for her, and he was not happy that she'd disappeared. Emma's first instinct was to run, to drop the dishes and walk straight out the back door and never come back. But she couldn't. She needed this job, needed the money, needed to keep some semblance of normalcy even as everything else fell apart. So she finished clearing the table, carried the dishes to the kitchen, and then forced herself to walk over to where Dominic sat. "Can I get you something to drink?" Her voice came out steady, professional, like he was just another customer. Dominic's jaw tightened. "Where have you been?" "I don't know what you mean." "You blocked my number, changed your shifts. I've been here every night for 2 weeks, Emma." She'd known he would notice, had hoped he'd give up, but of course he hadn't. Men like Dominic Russo didn't give up. "I've been busy," Emma said, meeting his eyes, even though it took every ounce of courage she had. "School, work, life. Was there something you wanted to order?" "We need to talk." "I'm working." "Then I'll wait." Emma opened her mouth to argue, but one of the other servers called her name. A table needed attention. She had orders to take. She couldn't stand here arguing with Dominic in the middle of the restaurant. "There's nothing to talk about," she said quietly. "What happened between us was a mistake. I'd appreciate it if you'd respect that and leave me alone." She walked away before he could respond, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. For the rest of her shift, Emma felt Dominic's eyes on her. He didn't order anything, didn't leave, just sat at that corner table, watching her move through the restaurant, his expression unreadable. By the time her shift ended at 11, Emma's nerves were stretched to the breaking point. She changed out of her work clothes in the employee bathroom, pulled on her jacket, and headed for the back exit. Dominic was waiting by her car. Of course he was. Emma stopped a few feet away, keys clutched in her hand. "You need to stop this." "Not until you tell me what I did wrong." He pushed off from where he'd been leaning against her car and took a step toward her. "We had one night together, Emma. One night that was incredible, at least from my perspective, and then you disappeared. So tell me, what did I do to make you run?" "You didn't do anything." "Then why?" "Because this," Emma gestured between them, isn't real. It can't be real. You're Dominic Russo. I'm a waitress putting herself through college. We're from completely different worlds, and getting involved with you would be the stupidest thing I could possibly do." Something flickered in Dominic's eyes. "You think I care about any of that?" "You should. I do. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you." His voice was low, intense. "From the moment I saw you in that restaurant, you've been in my head. That night we spent together only made it worse. So don't tell me what we have isn't real when I can barely focus on anything else." Emma's chest tightened. She wanted to believe him, wanted to think that what she'd felt that night, that connection, that electricity, had been real for him too. But she was carrying his child, and telling him would trap her in his world forever. "I'm sorry," she whispered, "but I can't do this. Please, just let me go." She moved past him toward her car, but Dominic caught her wrist. His touch was gentle, but it stopped her in her tracks. "At least tell me you're okay," he said quietly. "You look exhausted, Emma, like you haven't slept in days." She couldn't meet his eyes. If she did, she'd break. "I'm fine." "You're lying. It's none of your business." "It is if something's wrong." Emma pulled her wrist free and turned to face him. "Why do you care? You don't even know me." "I want to." The sincerity in his voice almost undid her. "I want to know everything about you, Emma. Your favorite color, what you're studying, why you work yourself to exhaustion at a job that doesn't appreciate you. I want to know why you're afraid of me when I've never given you a reason to be." "I'm not afraid of you." "Then what are you afraid of?" "This, us, the baby growing inside me that will tie us together forever." But she couldn't say any of that. "I have to go," Emma said instead. She got in her car before Dominic could stop her again, started the engine, and pulled out of the parking lot without looking back. In her rearview mirror, she saw him standing under the parking lot lights, watching her drive away. For the next week, Emma managed to avoid Dominic. She traded shifts with other servers, came in through different doors, parked in different spots. It was exhausting and paranoid, but it worked. Until it didn't. Emma had just gotten home from her Thursday night shift when she heard footsteps in the hallway outside her apartment. Heavy, measured footsteps that stopped right outside her door. Then came the knock. Not gentle, not tentative. 3 sharp raps that echoed through the tiny studio. Emma froze, her hand on the light switch. She knew who it was before he spoke. "Emma." Dominic's voice came through the door, firm but not angry. "I know you're in there. I can see your light under the door. We need to talk." Her mind raced. How did he know where she lived? Had he followed her? Had someone at the restaurant told him? "Go away, Dominic." "Not until you open this door." "I'll call the police." "No, you won't." He was right. She wouldn't. "I'm not here to hurt you or scare you. I just want to understand what's going on. 5 minutes, Emma. That's all I'm asking." Emma closed her eyes. She could refuse to answer, could wait him out until he left. But something in his voice made her hesitate. Not threat or anger, but genuine concern. And maybe a small, self-destructive part of her wanted to see him, wanted to be near him one more time before she had to cut him out of her life forever. Emma opened the door. Dominic stood in the hallway, still wearing his suit from dinner, his tie loosened and his hair slightly disheveled. He looked tired, and there was something raw in his expression that made her chest ache. "How did you find me?" she asked. "Does it matter?" "Yes. I have resources." He didn't apologize for using them. "Can I come in?" Emma hesitated, then stepped back to let him enter. Her apartment had never seemed smaller than it did with Dominic Russo standing in the middle of it, his presence filling every inch of space. He looked around at the futon that served as her bed, the tiny kitchenette, the single window, and something tightened in his expression. "You live here alone?" "It's what I can afford." "You deserve better than this." "I'm fine." Dominic turned to face her, and the intensity in his eyes made her breath catch. "No, you're not. Something's wrong. I've seen it every time I've looked at you this past week. You're exhausted, you're scared, and you won't tell me why." "Because it's not your problem." "Make it my problem." "I can't." "Why not?" He took a step closer. "Emma, if you're in some kind of trouble, I'm pregnant." The words came out before Emma could stop them, sharp and abrupt in the quiet apartment. She hadn't meant to tell him, had promised herself she wouldn't, but the lie was too heavy to carry anymore, and Dominic was looking at her with such concern that the truth just spilled out. Dominic went completely still. For a long moment, he just stared at her, his expression unreadable. What? His voice came out rough. Emma's hands were shaking. I'm pregnant, and before you ask, yes, it's yours. There hasn't been anyone else. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma watched emotions flicker across Dominic's face, shock, disbelief, something that might have been fear before his expression shuddered. How long have you known? About a week? And you weren't going to tell me. It wasn't a question. Emma wrapped her arms around herself. I didn't see the point. We're not together. We were never going to be together. This doesn't change that. The hell it doesn't. Dominic's voice was low, dangerous. You're carrying my child, Emma. You think I'd just walk away from that? I'm not asking you for anything. I don't care what you're asking for. This is my responsibility. It's my decision. Like hell, Dominic stopped, visibly trying to control his temper. When he spoke again, his voice was calmer but no less intense. What are you planning to do? Emma hadn't let herself think that far ahead. The pregnancy was still too new, too overwhelming. I don't know. Are you keeping it? The question hit her like a physical blow. Emma's hand moved unconsciously to her still flat stomach. Yes. Something in Dominic's expression softened. Then we need to figure this out. There's nothing to figure out. I'll manage. In this apartment? Dominic gestured at the tiny studio. Working nights while going to school? Emma, that's not sustainable even without a baby. People do it all the time. Not my child, not you. The possessiveness in his voice should have made her angry. Instead, it made something warm unfurl in her chest. What are you suggesting? Emma asked quietly. Move in with me. She actually laughed, the sound bitter. You're insane. I'm practical. You need help. I can provide it. In exchange for what? Dominic's jaw tightened. In exchange for nothing. This isn't a transaction, Emma. It's about taking care of you and the baby. I don't need you to take care of me. Maybe not, but our child does. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications. Our child. Not your child or my child, but ours. A shared responsibility, a shared future. Emma felt tears prick at her eyes. She was so tired of being strong, of holding everything together on her own. And here was Dominic, offering her a way out of the constant struggle. But at what cost? I need to think about it, she said. Dominic studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, but Emma... He stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. I meant what I said before. I haven't been able to stop thinking about you. Finding out about the baby doesn't change that. If anything, it makes me more certain that you're supposed to be in my life. You don't know me, Emma whispered. Then let me. His hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. Let me know you, Emma. Let me be there for you and this baby. I know I'm not an easy man to be with. I know my life is complicated and dangerous, but I swear to you, I will do everything in my power to keep you both safe. Emma closed her eyes, leaning into his touch despite every logical reason not to. I'm scared. I know, so am I. The admission surprised her. Dominic Russo, the man the entire city feared, was scared. Of what? She asked. Of screwing this up, of not being the father this child deserves, of losing you before I ever really had you. His voice was raw with honesty. But I'm more scared of not trying. Emma opened her eyes and found Dominic watching her with an expression so vulnerable it took her breath away. This was not the ruthless crime boss the city whispered about. This was just a man, terrified and hopeful in equal measure. I need time, she said finally. Dominic nodded slowly, his hand falling away from her face. How much time? I don't know. A few days? A week? I need to figure out what I want, what's best for the baby. Okay? He reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card. This is my personal number. Call me when you've decided. Or if you need anything before then. Anything at all, Emma, day or night. She took the card, her fingers brushing his. The contact sent electricity up her arm, reminding her of why one night with him had been so dangerous. Dominic headed for the door, then paused with his hand on the knob. "For what it's worth, I'm glad you told me, and I'm glad you're keeping the baby." Then he was gone, leaving Emma alone in her tiny apartment with a business card and a decision that would change her life forever. She walked to the bathroom and stared at the sink where she'd burned the pregnancy test. The evidence was gone, but the truth remained. She was pregnant with Dominic Russo's child, and for the first time since seeing those two pink lines, Emma allowed herself to imagine a future where she wasn't alone. Emma didn't sleep that night. She lay on her futon staring at the ceiling, Dominic's business card on the nightstand beside her, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on her chest like a physical thing. Move in with him. Let him take care of her, accept help from a man whose world was built on violence and power. Every rational part of her brain screamed that it was a terrible idea, that getting closer to Dominic would only make her more vulnerable, more dependent, more trapped. But the exhausted, terrified part of her, the part that was barely keeping her head above water, whispered that maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to do this alone. By the time dawn light filtered through her window, Emma had made a decision. Not the one Dominic wanted, but a compromise she could live with. She would let him help, but on her terms. Emma waited until 9 in the morning to call the number on the card. The phone rang twice before Dominic answered, his voice alert despite the early hour. "Emma." Just her name, but the way he said it made her stomach flip. "I've thought about your offer," she said, forcing herself to sound more confident than she felt. "And I have some conditions." "I'm listening." "I'm not moving in with you. I need my own space, my independence. But I'll let you help with expenses related to the pregnancy. Doctor's appointments, vitamins, things like that. And we can discuss what happens after the baby comes when we get there." Silence stretched on the other end of the line. Emma held her breath, waiting for Dominic to argue, to demand more. "That's not enough," he said finally. "This apartment isn't safe, Emma. The locks are flimsy, there's no security, and you're on the 4th floor with no elevator. What happens when you're 7 months pregnant and can barely climb the stairs?" "I'll manage." "You keep saying that, but you shouldn't have to just manage. Let me find you a better place, somewhere safe, with actual security. You can have your independence, your own space, just somewhere I don't have to worry about you every second of the day." Emma closed her eyes. It was a reasonable compromise, and they both knew it. She hated that he was right about the apartment. It barely felt safe now, let alone when she was pregnant and vulnerable. "Nothing too expensive," she said quietly. "Nothing that makes me feel like I'm being kept." "You're not being kept. You're being protected. There's a difference." "Is there?" "Yes." Dominic's voice was firm. "One is about control. The other is about caring. I'm not trying to own you, Emma. I'm trying to make sure you and our child are safe." Our child. Those words still sent a jolt through her every time he said them. "Okay," Emma agreed, "but I picked the place. You can pay for it, but I get final say." "Deal. I'll have my real estate agent send you some listings this afternoon." "Your real estate agent?" "I own several properties in the city. She manages them for me." He paused. "Emma, there's something else we need to discuss." The seriousness in his tone made her tense. "What?" "My enemies can't know about you or the baby." The word sent a chill down her spine. "Your enemies." "I've made a lot of them over the years. People who would love nothing more than to find a weakness they could exploit if they found out about you, about the pregnancy." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Emma's hand moved instinctively to her stomach. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying we need to be careful, discreet. No public appearances together, no paper trail connecting us. When you move to a new apartment, it'll be in your name only. I'll pay the rent through a series of shell companies. Your doctor's appointments should be at a private practice, paid in cash." This sounds like something out of a movie. "This is my life, Emma, and now it's yours too." His voice softened. "I know it's a lot to ask, but until I can figure out a more permanent solution, we need to be smart about this." Emma sank onto her futon, the reality of the situation washing over her. This wasn't just about having a baby with someone she barely knew. This was about entering a world where danger lurked around every corner, where something as simple as being seen together could put her life at risk. "What kind of permanent solution?" she asked. Dominic was quiet for a long moment. "I'm working on it, but it's going to take time." "That's not an answer. It's the only one I have right now." He sighed. "I need to go. I have meetings this morning, but I'll call you later, okay? And Emma, thank you for trusting me enough to let me help." After they hung up, Emma sat in the silence of her apartment and wondered what she'd just agreed to. The listings arrived that afternoon, forwarded from an email address with the signature Margaret Chen Luxury Property Management. There were a dozen options, ranging from a one-bedroom in a high-rise downtown to a small house in the suburbs with a fenced yard. Emma scrolled through them with a growing sense of unreality. Every single property was nicer than anywhere she'd ever lived. Hardwood floors, updated kitchens, in-unit laundry. The cheapest rent listed was 3 times what she was paying now. She called Dominic back. "These are all too expensive." "The rent doesn't matter. Pick the one you like best." "Dominic, Emma." His voice was patient but firm. "You're carrying my child. Let me do this. Please." In the end, she chose a 2-bedroom apartment in a quieter neighborhood on the east side. It was on the second floor of a converted brownstone, with tall windows that let in natural light and a small balcony overlooking a tree-lined street. The building had a security entrance and a doorman who worked the evening shift. It felt safe. It felt like somewhere she could actually imagine raising a baby. "Good choice," Dominic said when she told him. "Margaret will have the paperwork ready by tomorrow. You can move in this weekend." "This weekend? That's too fast." "Why wait? The sooner you're out of that apartment, the better I'll feel." Emma wanted to argue, but the truth was she didn't have much to pack. Her entire life fit into a few boxes and suitcases, and the thought of leaving her cramped studio for a real apartment with actual space made her chest ache with something that felt dangerously close to hope. "Okay," she agreed. "This weekend." Moving day arrived with unseasonable warmth for late February. Emma had expected to handle it alone, maybe with help from her roommate from freshman year who lived across town. What she hadn't expected was Dominic showing up at her apartment at 8 in the morning with 3 men in a moving truck. "You didn't need to do this," Emma said as Dominic walked through her door carrying coffee and a bag from the bakery down the street. "Yes, I did. You're not moving furniture in your condition." He set the coffee and pastries on her counter. "The movers will handle everything. You just need to tell them where things go." Emma wanted to be annoyed at his high-handedness, but the smell of fresh coffee and warm croissants derailed her irritation. She hadn't been able to keep much food down lately, but her stomach actually rumbled with interest. "Thank you," she said quietly, accepting the coffee he handed her. Dominic's expression softened. "You're welcome. How are you feeling?" "Tired, nauseous, overwhelmed. Have you found a doctor yet?" Emma shook her head. "I've been doing research, but I haven't made an appointment." "I have a recommendation, Dr. Sarah Mitchell. She's discreet, experienced, and she's delivered half the babies for the families I know. I can set up an appointment for you if you want." The families he knew were probably all connected to organized crime, but Emma didn't point that out. "Okay, yes, thank you." The next 3 hours passed in a blur of activity. The movers packed up her belongings with efficient precision while Dominic supervised, making sure nothing was damaged or forgotten. Emma mostly stayed out of the way, sitting on her futon with her coffee and watching her entire life get dismantled and loaded into boxes. It should have felt sad, leaving the apartment where she'd lived for the past 2 years. Instead, it felt like closing a chapter she was ready to be done with. By noon, they were pulling up in front of the brownstone on the east side. The building was even nicer in person than it had looked in photos. Well-maintained brick facade, flower boxes in the windows, a quiet street with actual trees. The doorman, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, greeted them in the lobby. "You must be Ms. Clark. I'm Robert. Welcome to the building." "Thank you," Emma said, shaking his hand. "I'll be here weekday evenings and all day Saturday," Robert continued. "If you need anything or if anyone gives you trouble, you just let me know." The way he said it made Emma wonder if Dominic had already spoken to him. The thought should have bothered her, but instead it made her feel oddly protected. The apartment was on the second floor, just as the listing had promised. Dominic unlocked the door and stepped back to let Emma enter first. She walked into a space filled with afternoon sunlight. The hardwood floors gleamed, The walls were freshly painted in soft cream, and the kitchen had actual counter space and appliances that looked like they were made sometime in the last decade. Through the doorway to the left, Emma could see the larger bedroom, empty and waiting. The second bedroom was smaller but still bigger than the corner she'd been sleeping in for 2 years. "What do you think?" Dominic asked from behind her. Emma turned to face him, surprised to find her eyes stinging with tears. "It's perfect." Something in Dominic's expression cracked open. He crossed the space between them in 2 strides and pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was something precious that might break. Emma let herself sink into the embrace, breathing in the scent of his cologne and feeling the solid warmth of him against her. For just a moment, she let herself imagine that this was normal, that they were a regular couple moving into their first apartment together, excited about starting a family. Then reality crashed back and she pulled away, wiping at her eyes. "Sorry," she muttered. "Hormones." "You don't have to apologize." Dominic's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a stray tear. "This is a big change. It's okay to be emotional about it." The movers arrived then, breaking the moment. Emma directed them where to put her meager furniture while Dominic made phone calls in the other room, his voice too low for her to hear but the intensity unmistakable. By late afternoon, everything was unpacked. The movers left, and Emma found herself alone in the apartment with Dominic, surrounded by her belongings in a space that didn't quite feel like hers yet. "I should let you settle in," Dominic said, but he didn't move toward the door. "Do you want to stay for dinner?" The invitation came out before Emma could think better of it. "I mean, I don't have much food yet, but I could order something, as a thank you for all your help." Dominic's expression went soft. "I'd like that." They ended up ordering Thai food from a place 2 blocks away. While they waited for delivery, Emma gave Dominic a proper tour of the apartment, which didn't take long given the size, and he pointed out features she'd missed: a linen closet in the hallway, extra storage in the kitchen, the way the bedroom faced east so she'd get morning light. When the food arrived, they sat on Emma's futon in the living room, eating pad thai straight from the containers because Emma hadn't unpacked her dishes yet. "This is nice," Emma said, surprised to realize she meant it. "Normal." Dominic smiled. "We could do this more often, if you want." "What, eat takeout on my futon?" "Spend time together. Get to know each other properly." He set down his food and turned to face her. "I meant what I said before, Emma. I want to know you, and I want you to know me, the real me, not the man everyone else sees." Emma's heart raced. "Why me? You could have anyone. Someone from your world who understands how things work. Someone who wouldn't be terrified of what being with you means. Because when I look at you, I see someone who hasn't been corrupted by my world. Someone genuine and strong and brave enough to put herself through school while working nights at a job that doesn't appreciate her. Someone who didn't run when she found out she was pregnant, even though it would have been easier." Dominic reached out and took her hand. "Someone who makes me want to be better than I am." "I'm not that special," Emma whispered. "You are to me." The intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. Emma knew she should pull her hand away, should maintain some distance. Instead, she found herself leaning closer. "This is complicated," she said. "I know. I don't even know what you do. Not really. I know the rumors, the reputation, but not the actual truth." Dominic's jaw tightened. "Do you want to know?" Emma thought about it. Did she? Would knowing the details of his business make this easier or harder? Not yet, she decided. Maybe eventually. But right now, I think I'd rather just get to know you. The man who brings me coffee and helps me move and looks at me like I'm something precious. You are precious. To me, you are. They finished eating in comfortable silence, and then Dominic helped Emma unpack her kitchen boxes, handing her dishes to wash while he put them away in the cabinets. It was domestic and simple, and Emma felt something in her chest loosen. When the kitchen was done, Dominic finally moved toward the door. I should go. Let you rest. Emma walked him out, suddenly reluctant to see him leave. Thank you for everything. The apartment, the help with moving, dinner. You don't have to thank me. Dominic paused in the doorway, turning back to face her. Can I see you again? Properly this time, not just moving furniture. Like a date? Like whatever you're comfortable with. Emma bit her lip. I have class Tuesday and Thursday evenings, and I work Wednesday, Friday, and Saturday nights. What about Sunday? Sunday, I'm free. Then let me take you to brunch on Sunday, somewhere quiet where we can talk. Emma knew she should say no, should maintain boundaries and distance and all the smart things she'd promised herself when she first decided to tell Dominic about the pregnancy. But standing in the doorway of her new apartment, looking at the man who'd just spent his entire Saturday making sure she was safe and settled, Emma couldn't find the will to refuse. Okay, she agreed. Sunday brunch. The smile that crossed Dominic's face transformed him. I'll pick you up at 11. After he left, Emma locked the door and leaned against it, her heart racing. She was in so much trouble. Because somewhere between burning that pregnancy test and moving into this apartment, she'd started falling for Dominic Russo. And that was the most dangerous thing she could possibly do. Sunday morning arrived bright and cold. Emma spent an hour trying to figure out what to wear to brunch with a crime boss, eventually settling on a simple navy dress and cardigan. Her clothes were starting to feel tighter around the middle, though she wasn't showing yet. She'd have to go shopping for maternity clothes soon, another expense she couldn't quite wrap her head around. Dominic arrived exactly at 11, dressed casually in dark jeans and a charcoal sweater that made his eyes look even darker. He held out a small bouquet of tulips. For you, he said. I noticed you liked flowers. There were flower boxes in all the apartment photos you marked as favorites. Emma's throat tightened. Such a small observation, but it meant he'd been paying attention. Thank you. They're beautiful. She put the tulips in water, using a mason jar since she didn't own a vase, and then let Dominic lead her to his car, a sleek black sedan that probably cost more than she'd make in 5 years. They drove to a small bistro in a neighborhood Emma had never been to before, the kind of place that didn't have a sign but was clearly known to those in the know. Inside, the hostess greeted Dominic by name and led them to a private table in the back corner. Do you come here often? Emma asked once they were seated. Sometimes. It's quiet, the food is excellent, and the owner doesn't ask questions. Of course he didn't. They ordered. Emma got French toast despite her uncertain stomach, while Dominic ordered an omelet, and then sat in the comfortable quiet of the nearly empty restaurant. Tell me about school, Dominic said. What are you studying? Business administration. I'm graduating this May, assuming I can finish my last semester. Emma twisted her napkin in her lap. I wanted to understand how companies work, how to manage people and resources. Maybe open my own business someday. What kind of business? I don't know yet. Maybe a restaurant or a small consulting firm. Something that's mine, you know? Something I built from nothing. Dominic's expression was thoughtful. That's admirable. A lot of people inherit their positions, inherit their power. They never know what it's like to build something from scratch. Is that what you did? Inherit? Yes and no. I inherited the framework from my father, the connections, the territory, the reputation. But I've had to prove myself every single day since I took over. In my world, weakness gets you killed. So does complacency. Emma shivered. That sounds exhausting. It is. Dominic reached across the table and took her hand. But sitting here with you, talking about normal things like school and future dreams, this is the most relaxed I've felt in years. Their food arrived then, and Emma discovered that despite the morning sickness that had plagued her for weeks, she was actually hungry. The French toast was perfect, crispy on the outside, soft on the inside, with fresh strawberries and real maple syrup. Good? Dominic asked, watching her eat with obvious amusement. Amazing. I haven't been able to keep much food down lately, but this is perfect. His expression turned concerned. The morning sickness is bad? It's manageable. Worse in the mornings, better by afternoon. I've been eating a lot of crackers. Dr. Mitchell can prescribe something for that if it gets worse. I called her office Friday and set up an appointment for you next Thursday at 2. Is that okay? Emma had forgotten he'd mentioned making an appointment. Thursday at 2 works. I don't have class until 6. Good. I'd like to come with you, if you're comfortable with that. The request caught her off guard. To the doctor's appointment? I want to be involved, Emma, in all of it. Appointments, decisions, everything. This is my child too. Our child. There were those words again, making her chest feel too tight. Okay, Emma agreed. You can come. They finished brunch, and then Dominic asked if she wanted to take a walk. The day was cold but clear, and Emma found herself agreeing. They strolled through a nearby park, past families with children and couples holding hands, and Emma tried to imagine what her life would look like in a year. Would she and Dominic be like these couples, walking with a baby in a stroller? Or would she be alone, navigating single motherhood while Dominic provided financial support from a distance? "What are you thinking about?" Dominic asked. "The future. How different everything is going to be." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Emma, I need to tell you something, and I need you to really hear me." The seriousness in his tone made her stop walking. "Okay." Dominic turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "I know this situation isn't ideal. I know we barely know each other, and my life is complicated and dangerous. But I need you to understand that I'm all in, not just with the baby, but with you. I want to make this work. Want to build something real with you." Emma's heart raced. "Dominic, I know it's fast, I know it's crazy, but I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. And finding out about the baby didn't create those feelings. It just made them impossible to ignore." "This isn't a romance novel," Emma said, trying to inject some reality into the moment. "You can't just decide we're meant to be together because I'm pregnant." "You're right, I can't decide that alone. But I can try to show you that I'm serious, that this isn't just about the baby or some sense of obligation. I want you, Emma, all of you. Your sharp mind and your stubborn independence and the way you look at me like I'm just a man instead of a monster." Tears pricked at Emma's eyes. "I'm scared." "I know, so am I." Dominic pulled her closer. "But maybe we can be scared together." Emma let him fold her into his arms, breathing in his scent and feeling his heart beat against her cheek. She knew this was reckless, knew she was letting herself fall for a man whose world could destroy her. But standing in the winter sunlight with Dominic's arms around her, Emma couldn't bring herself to pull away. Over the next 2 weeks, a routine developed. Dominic called every morning to check on her, sent her texts throughout the day, asking if she needed anything, and came by the apartment most evenings with dinner and conversation. He never pushed for more than Emma was willing to give, never pressured her about their relationship or where things were heading. Instead, he just showed up, consistently, patiently, proving through his actions that he meant what he said. Emma found herself looking forward to his visits, to the easy conversation and the way he listened when she talked about her classes or complained about difficult customers at work. With Dominic, she didn't have to be strong or independent or self-sufficient. She could just be herself. The Thursday of her first doctor's appointment arrived with nerves jangling in Emma's stomach. Dominic picked her up at 1:30, and they drove to a medical building in an upscale part of town. The office was on the 3rd floor, marked only with a discreet brass plaque that read, "Dr. Sarah Mitchell, OB-GYN." Inside, the waiting room was elegant and quiet, with comfortable chairs and soft music playing. The receptionist greeted them with a warm smile that didn't even flicker when Emma gave her name and the woman pulled up her file. "The doctor will be right with you," she said. "If you could just fill out these forms." Emma sat next to Dominic in the waiting room, working her way through pages of medical history questions. When she got to the section about the father, she hesitated. "What?" Dominic asked, noticing her pause. "It's asking about your medical history, family history of genetic conditions, that kind of thing." "My family is healthy, no major genetic issues that I know of." Emma wrote that down, hyper-aware of the questions she wasn't asking, like whether violence ran in his family, whether the predisposition for a life of crime was genetic. "Ms. Clark?" A nurse appeared in the doorway. "The doctor is ready for you." Dominic stood when Emma did, and she was grateful when he followed her back without asking permission. They were led to an examination room where Emma changed into a gown and then waited, her heart pounding. Dr. Mitchell was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an efficient manner. She greeted them both warmly, shook their hands, and then got straight to business. "So Emma, you're about 8 weeks along?" "Around that, yes." "And how are you feeling?" "Tired, nauseous, but managing." Dr. Mitchell asked a series of questions about Emma's symptoms, her medical history, her lifestyle. Then she did a physical exam and finally brought out the ultrasound machine. "Let's take a look at this baby," she said. Emma lay back on the examination table, her hand finding Dominic's automatically. He squeezed her fingers, his grip tight. The doctor applied gel to Emma's stomach and then pressed the ultrasound wand against her skin. For a moment, there was only static on the screen. Then an image appeared, fuzzy and indistinct, but unmistakably there. "There's your baby," Dr. Mitchell said, pointing to a small blob on the screen, "measuring right at 8 weeks. And there's the heartbeat." A rhythmic whooshing sound filled the room, fast and strong. Emma's breath caught. That was her baby. Their baby. Real and alive and growing inside her. She looked up at Dominic and found him staring at the screen with an expression of absolute wonder. His hand tightened on hers, and when he met her eyes, she saw tears. "That's our child," he whispered. "Yeah," Emma whispered back. "It is, Doctor." Mitchell printed out ultrasound photos and gave Emma a prescription for prenatal vitamins and something for the nausea. She scheduled a follow-up appointment for 4 weeks out and sent them on their way with a folder full of information about pregnancy and what to expect. In the car afterward, Dominic didn't start the engine right away. He just sat there, staring at the ultrasound photo in his hands. "You okay?" Emma asked. "I didn't think it would feel like this," he said quietly. "Seeing it, hearing the heartbeat, it makes it real in a way nothing else has." "I know." Dominic looked at her, and the vulnerability in his expression made her chest ache. "Thank you for letting me be here for this. You're the father. Of course you should be here." "Not all women would feel that way, especially given my circumstances." Emma reached out and took the ultrasound photo from him, studying the tiny form on the grainy image. "This baby deserves to have both parents. Whatever else happens between us, I want you to be part of their life." "And what about us?" Dominic asked. "What do you want to happen between us?" It was the question Emma had been avoiding for weeks, because the truth was she was already in too deep, already cared about Dominic more than was wise, already imagined a future where they were more than just co-parents. "I don't know," she admitted. "I'm still figuring it out." Dominic reached across the center console and cupped her face in his hand. "Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere." Then he kissed her, soft and gentle, like she was something precious. Emma let herself sink into it, tasting promise and possibility, and the dangerous hope that maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. When they finally broke apart, Dominic started the car and drove Emma back to her apartment. He walked her to her door, kissed her again, and then left with a promise to call her later. Inside, Emma looked at the ultrasound photo and felt the last of her resistance crumble. She was in love with Dominic Russo. Completely, impossibly, terrifyingly in love. And there was no going back from that. The realization that she loved Dominic should have terrified Emma more than it did. Instead, over the following days, it settled into her bones like something inevitable, something that had been building since the moment their eyes first met across that crowded restaurant. But love didn't erase reality. And the reality was that Dominic's world was closing in around them faster than Emma had anticipated. It started small. A black SUV that appeared on her street 3 mornings in a row, parked in the same spot with tinted windows that revealed nothing. Robert the doorman mentioning casually that a man had come by asking questions about the new tenant in 2B. The feeling of being watched that prickled at the back of Emma's neck when she walked to class. She didn't mention it to Dominic at first, told herself she was being paranoid, that pregnancy hormones were making her jumpy. But when she came home from her Wednesday shift at the restaurant to find her apartment door slightly ajar, the lock scratched like someone had tried to pick it, fear overrode pride. Emma didn't go inside. She backed away from the door, pulled out her phone with shaking hands, and called Dominic. He answered on the first ring. "Emma, what's wrong?" "Someone tried to break into my apartment." Her voice came out steadier than she felt. "The door's open and the lock is damaged. I didn't go in. I don't know if they're still inside." "Where are you right now?" The edge in Dominic's voice was sharp as a blade. "In the hallway, near the stairs." "Get out of the building, go to the coffee shop on the corner, and wait for me there. I'm 10 minutes away." "Should I call the police?" "No, I'll handle this. Just get somewhere safe." Emma did as he said, practically running down the stairs and out onto the street. The coffee shop was warm and crowded with late-night students, and she ordered a decaf tea she didn't want just to have something to do with her hands while she waited. Dominic arrived in 8 minutes, not 10. He walked through the door with 2 men Emma had never seen before, both tall, both built like they could break someone in half without much effort. They swept the coffee shop with their eyes before Dominic spotted Emma in the back corner and crossed to her table. "Are you okay?" He crouched beside her chair, his hands coming up to frame her face, checking for injuries. "I'm fine. I didn't go inside. I just saw the door and I called you." "You did exactly right." Dominic straightened and gestured to the two men. "Marco and Vincent are going to check your apartment. Make sure it's clear." "Who do you think it was?" Dominic's jaw tightened. "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." 20 minutes later, Marco returned to the coffee shop and nodded to Dominic. "Clear. Looks like they got interrupted before they could finish searching. Place is a mess, but nothing seems to be missing." Emma's stomach twisted. "They were looking for something. Or someone," Dominic said quietly. He stood and held out his hand. "Come on, let's get you packed. You're not staying here tonight." "Dominic, this isn't a discussion, Emma. Someone knows where you live and they were inside your home. You're not safe here anymore." Part of Emma wanted to argue, wanted to insist on her independence, her right to make her own decisions. But the larger part, the part that was carrying a child and had just discovered what real fear felt like, knew he was right. She let Dominic lead her back to her building. Inside the apartment, everything was exactly as Marco had described. Drawers pulled out, cushions moved, her things scattered across the floor. Whoever had broken in had been searching methodically, looking for something specific. Emma's hand shook as she packed a bag with clothes and essentials, while Dominic stood in the doorway, his expression carved from stone. When she was done, he took her bag and guided her out of the apartment with a hand on the small of her back. "Where are we going?" Emma asked as they got into his car. "Somewhere safe." They drove for 30 minutes, leaving the city behind and heading into the suburbs. The houses grew larger, the lots more spacious, until Dominic turned onto a private road that wound through carefully manicured grounds. At the end of the road sat an estate that looked like something out of a magazine. White stone facade, tall windows, gardens that probably required a full-time staff to maintain. "This is your house?" Emma asked. "The family estate. I have an apartment downtown that I use during the week, but this is home." Dominic pulled up to the front entrance where a woman in her 50s waited on the steps. "That's Rosa. She manages the household." Rosa greeted them with warm efficiency, taking Emma's bag and leading them inside without asking questions. The interior of the house was as impressive as the exterior. High ceilings, expensive art on the walls, furniture that looked antique, and probably was. But it was the woman who appeared at the top of the stairs who made Emma freeze. She was in her early 70s, elegant in a way that spoke of old money and older traditions. Dark hair gone silver, sharp eyes that missed nothing, and a posture that commanded respect. She descended the stairs with the bearing of a queen, her gaze fixed on Emma with an intensity that made her want to squirm. "Mother," Dominic said, and Emma heard the tension in his voice. "This is Emma Clark. Emma, this is my mother, Catherine Russo." Catherine stopped 3 steps from the bottom of the staircase, studying Emma with an expression that revealed nothing. "So you're the girl my son has been sneaking around with." "Mother," Dominic began, but Catherine held up a hand. "Don't. I may be old, but I'm not blind. You've been distracted for weeks, disappearing at odd hours, making mysterious phone calls." Her gaze shifted to Emma's still flat stomach, and something flickered in her eyes. "And now you bring her here, to the family home, which means either she's in danger or she's important enough to protect. Given the way you're looking at her, I suspect it's both." Emma found her voice. "Mrs. Russo, I'm sorry to intrude. It's not an intrusion if my son invited you." Catherine finished descending the stairs and came to stand directly in front of Emma. Up close, she was shorter than Emma had expected, but no less imposing. "And please call me Catherine. Mrs. Russo makes me feel ancient." There was a hint of warmth in the words that gave Emma courage. "Thank you for letting me stay here." "Are you going to tell me why you need to stay here? Or should I guess?" Catherine's eyes flicked to Dominic. "Does this have to do with the Castellanos?" Dominic's expression darkened. "I don't know yet, but someone broke into Emma's apartment tonight, searched it. They were looking for something or gathering information. And you brought her here instead of putting her in a safe house." Catherine's tone was pointed. "Interesting choice. She's not going to some anonymous apartment where I can't protect her properly. No, instead you bring her to the one place your enemies would look if they wanted to find your weakness. Catherine shook her head. You're thinking with your heart instead of your head, Dominic. That's dangerous. I know what I'm doing. Do you? Catherine's gaze moved between them. Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're making the same mistakes your father made, getting attached to someone who could be used against you. The words hung in the air, sharp and cutting. Emma saw Dominic's hands curl into fists at his sides, saw the muscle in his jaw jump. Emma is pregnant, he said quietly, with my child. So yes, Mother, I'm protecting her, and I don't give a damn what mistakes you think I'm making. Catherine went very still. For a long moment, she just stared at her son, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to Emma, and something in her eyes had changed. How far along are you? 8 weeks, Emma whispered. And you're sure it's Dominic's? The question should have been insulting, but Catherine asked it with clinical detachment, like she was gathering facts rather than making accusations. I'm sure, Emma said firmly. Catherine nodded slowly, then did something Emma didn't expect. She reached out and took Emma's hand, squeezing it gently. Then welcome to the family, my dear. You're going to need all the help you can get. The words should have been comforting. Instead, they sent a chill down Emma's spine. Rosa showed Emma to a guest room on the second floor that was bigger than her entire apartment had been. King-size bed, sitting area, private bathroom with a soaking tub. It was beautiful and comfortable and felt nothing like home. After Rosa left, Emma sat on the edge of the bed and tried to process everything that had happened in the past 3 hours. Someone had broken into her apartment. She was staying at Dominic's family estate. His mother knew about the pregnancy. Her life had officially spiraled completely out of her control. A knock on the door made her look up. Dominic entered, still wearing the same tight expression he'd had since they arrived. I'm sorry about my mother, he said, closing the door behind him. She can be intense. She's protective of you. I understand that. Dominic crossed the room and sat beside her on the bed. She's also right. Bringing you here was a risk, but I couldn't put you somewhere I couldn't reach immediately if something went wrong. What's going on, Dominic? And please, don't tell me you don't know. Someone doesn't just randomly break into an apartment and tear it apart looking for something. He was quiet for a long moment, his hands clasped between his knees. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy. There's a power struggle happening right now in the organization. Some of the older families think I'm too young, too aggressive, making too many changes. They want me out. Out meaning what? Dead? Dead or discredited. Either works for them. Dominic looked at her, and the exhaustion in his eyes made him look older than his 32 years. I've been trying to consolidate power, to modernize our operations and move away from some of the more violent aspects of the business. But that threatens people who've built their empires on the old ways. So they're looking for leverage against you. That's my best guess. If they know about you, about the baby, they could use that to force my hand, make me step down in exchange for your safety. Emma's blood ran cold. Would you? Step down if they threatened me? Dominic reached out and cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones. In a heartbeat, you and our child mean more to me than any amount of power. The declaration should have been romantic. Instead, it was terrifying, because it meant Emma was exactly what Catherine had called her, a weakness that could be exploited. Then we need to figure out who broke into my apartment, Emma said, and we need to make sure they don't find out about the baby. Too late for that. Dominic's expression was grim. If they were in your apartment, they would have found the prenatal vitamins in your bathroom, the information from Dr. Mitchell's office in your desk drawer. They know, Emma, or they will soon. Fear clawed at Emma's chest. So what do? We adapt, and we make sure you're protected. Dominic stood and pulled out his phone. I'm calling a meeting with my inner circle tomorrow. People I trust completely. We need to identify who's behind this and neutralize the threat before it gets worse. Neutralize? Emma repeated the word, tasting the violence hidden beneath it. What does that mean exactly? Dominic looked at her, and for the first time she saw the ruthless crime boss the city feared. It means I do whatever is necessary to keep you safe. Whatever is necessary, Emma, no matter the cost. She should have been horrified, should have recoiled from the cold certainty in his voice. Instead, she stood and crossed to him, wrapping her arms around his waist and holding on tight. "I'm scared," she whispered against his chest. "I know. So am I." His arms came around her solid and warm. "But I swear to you, nothing is going to happen to you or our baby. I'll burn down my entire empire before I let anyone hurt you." They stood like that for a long moment, holding each other in the quiet of the guest room. Then Dominic pulled back and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Get some rest. I'll be right down the hall if you need anything." After he left, Emma changed into pajamas and climbed into the massive bed. But sleep wouldn't come. She lay in the darkness, one hand on her stomach, and wondered what kind of world she was bringing her child into. Morning came with weak sunlight filtering through curtains Emma didn't remember closing. She woke to find a breakfast tray on the nightstand, fresh fruit, toast, tea, and a note in Rosa's neat handwriting saying to ring if she needed anything. Emma ate mechanically, then showered and dressed in clothes from the bag she'd hastily packed. When she finally ventured downstairs, she found Catherine in a sunroom overlooking the gardens, reading a newspaper and drinking coffee. "Good morning," Catherine said without looking up. "Did you sleep well?" "Not really." "I imagine not. Pregnancy insomnia combined with fear for your safety doesn't make for restful nights." Catherine folded her paper and gestured to the chair across from her. "Sit. We should talk." Emma sat, her spine straight, meeting Catherine's gaze as directly as she could. "My son is in love with you," Catherine said without preamble. "I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you. It's both touching and deeply concerning." "Why concerning?" "Because in our world, love is a liability. It makes people reckless, makes them prioritize the wrong things. Dominic's father loved me very much, and it nearly destroyed him when I was targeted by his enemies." Catherine's expression was distant, remembering. He became unpredictable, violent in ways that weren't strategic. It took years for him to regain the respect he'd lost during that time. "What happened to you?" Emma asked quietly. "I survived. Obviously, but I learned an important lesson, that being loved by a man like my husband, like my son, means accepting that you'll always be a target, always be used as leverage." Catherine leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Are you prepared for that, Emma? For a life where you can never truly be safe, where your child will grow up with bodyguards and security protocols, and the knowledge that their father's business puts them in constant danger?" Emma's throat was tight. "I don't know. I'm still trying to wrap my head around all of this." "That's honest, at least." Catherine sat back. "Let me give you some advice, then. If you're going to be part of this family, you need to be strong. Not the kind of strength that comes from independence or self-sufficiency, but the kind that comes from understanding the rules of this world and learning to navigate them. You need to know when to push back and when to let Dominic protect you, when to trust and when to question. You're trying to help me. I'm trying to make sure my grandchild has a mother who survives long enough to raise them." Catherine's voice softened. "I don't know you, Emma, but Dominic chose you, and that means something. He's never brought a woman home before, never been serious about anyone. So either you're very special, or my son has lost his mind entirely." Emma managed a weak smile. "Maybe a little of both." Catherine's lips quirked. "I like you. You have spine. You'll need it." Before Emma could respond, Dominic appeared in the doorway. "Mother, stop terrorizing her." "I'm not terrorizing, I'm educating. There's a difference." Catherine stood gracefully. "Your people are arriving. Marco just called from the gate." Dominic's expression went serious. "Thank you. Emma, I need to take this meeting. It might be a few hours." "Can I sit in?" The question came out before Emma could think better of it. Both Dominic and Catherine looked at her in surprise. "This affects me," Emma continued. "My life, my safety, my baby's future. I think I have a right to hear what's being discussed." Dominic's jaw tightened. "Emma, these men, the things they're going to talk about aren't things a civilian should hear. I know, but I stopped being a civilian the moment I got pregnant with your child." Emma stood and faced him. "I'm not asking to participate, just to listen, to understand what we're actually dealing with." Dominic looked at his mother, who shrugged. "She makes a valid point, and if she's going to be part of this family, she'll hear worse eventually." After a long pause, Dominic nodded. "Okay, but you stay quiet, And if I tell you to leave, you leave immediately. Understood? Understood. The meeting took place in a study that looked like it belonged in a different century. Dark wood paneling, leather furniture, shelves lined with books that had probably never been read. 6 men filed in over the next 10 minutes, all of them giving Emma curious looks but saying nothing. Marco and Vincent she recognized from the night before. The others were strangers, though they all carried themselves with the same air of controlled danger. Dominic sat behind the desk while Emma took a chair in the corner, trying to make herself invisible. Catherine surprised her by staying as well, settling into a chair near the fireplace with her coffee like this was a perfectly normal family gathering. "Gentlemen," Dominic began, his voice carrying an authority that commanded immediate attention. "Last night someone broke into Emma's apartment. They searched it thoroughly, but didn't steal anything. This wasn't a random burglary. Someone is gathering information, and I need to know who and why." "The Castellanos," said one of the men, older with gray in his hair. "Has to be. They've been pushing boundaries for months, testing to see how you'll respond." "Or the Morettis," another suggested. "They're still bitter about losing the waterfront contracts." "It could be either of them, or someone else entirely." Dominic's fingers drummed on the desk. "Vincent, what did you find out about the lock?" Vincent pulled out his phone and scrolled through photos. Professional job, clean pics, minimal damage. Whoever did this has training. So, not street-level thugs, professionals. Dominic's expression darkened. "Marco, I want you to reach out to our contacts in both organizations. Feel them out, see if anyone knows anything. Be subtle about it." Marco nodded. "Already on it. I've got a meeting set up for tomorrow." "Good. Tony, I want security increased at all properties associated with the family, and get me a list of anyone who's been asking questions about my personal life in the past month." The man called Tony made notes on his phone. "Done. What about the girl's apartment? You want it secured or abandoned?" Emma flinched at being called the girl, but she kept quiet as she'd promised. "Secured for now," Dominic said, "but Emma won't be going back there. She'll stay here until we identify and eliminate the threat." "People will notice," the older man with gray hair pointed out. "Word will spread that you've brought a woman to the family estate. That'll raise questions." "Let them question. Anyone who matters already knows I don't explain myself." Dominic's voice was steel. "What matters is keeping Emma and my child safe. Everything else is secondary." The silence that followed was heavy. Emma saw the glances the men exchanged, the subtle shift in their body language. Catherine had been right. Bringing her here was a declaration, whether Dominic meant it that way or not. "There's something else you should know," Vincent said carefully. "We picked up chatter yesterday. Nothing concrete, just rumors. But word is someone's offering money for information about your personal life, specifically about any women you might be seeing." Dominic's hands flattened on the desk. "How much money?" "50,000 for solid information. More if it leads to something useful." Emma's breath caught. $50,000 was more money than she'd see in 2 years of waitressing. That kind of reward would motivate a lot of people to dig into Dominic's private life. "Double our security on everyone in the inner circle," Dominic ordered. "Families included. If they're looking for leverage, they won't stop at Emma. They'll go after anyone I care about." The meeting continued for another hour, with the men discussing security protocols and potential threats in language Emma only half understood. But she understood enough to know that the situation was serious, that the danger wasn't hypothetical, and that Dominic was taking unprecedented measures to protect her. Finally, Dominic dismissed everyone except Marco. "I need you to do something else. Off the books." Marco waited, his expression neutral. "Find me a way out," Dominic said quietly. "Out of the organization, out of this life. I want legitimate business plans, exit strategies, everything I'd need to walk away clean." Marco's eyes widened slightly. "Boss, that's complicated, dangerous, maybe impossible. I know." Dominic's voice was firm. "But I need to know my options. Can you do it?" "I can try. But Dominic, you need to understand what you're asking. You don't just walk away from this life. The families won't allow it. Then I'll make them allow it, whatever it takes." After Marco left, the study fell silent, except for the ticking of an antique clock on the mantel. Catherine stood and crossed to her son, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You're serious about this," she said. Not a question. "I'm serious about building a life that doesn't put my child in danger every single day." Dominic looked at Emma, and the intensity in his gaze made her chest ache. "I want to be the kind of father who can go to school plays and coach Little League without worrying about snipers. The kind of man Emma deserves." Catherine squeezed his shoulder. "Your father tried to go legitimate once. It nearly started a war. Then I'll be smarter about it, more patient. But I'm not raising my child in this world if I can help it." Emma stood on shaking legs and crossed to where Dominic sat. She didn't care that Catherine was watching or that this was all happening too fast. She just knew that this man, this complicated, dangerous, impossible man, was trying to change his entire life for her and their unborn child. "You don't have to do this," she said quietly. "I knew what your life was when I decided to keep the baby. I'm not asking you to give up everything. I know you're not asking. I'm offering." Dominic pulled her down into his lap, his arms coming around her waist. "I've spent 32 years building an empire I inherited. Maybe it's time I built something I actually chose." Emma leaned her forehead against his, breathing him in. "This isn't going to be easy. Nothing worth having ever is." Catherine cleared her throat delicately. "I'll leave you two alone, but Dominic, think very carefully about what you're planning. The consequences will be severe, and they won't just affect you." After she left, Emma and Dominic sat in silence, wrapped in each other, while the clock ticked and the afternoon light shifted across the study floor. Emma felt the weight of the future pressing down on them, heavy and uncertain. But she also felt something else, hope, fragile and terrifying, but real. Maybe they could actually do this, build a life together, raise their child in safety, find a way out of the darkness that surrounded Dominic's world. Or maybe she was being naive, and the danger closing in around them would destroy everything before they ever got the chance. Only time would tell. And time, Emma was beginning to realize, was the one thing they might not have enough of. The days that followed fell into an uneasy rhythm. Emma stayed at the estate while Dominic worked to identify who had broken into her apartment and why. Security tightened around the property, more guards at the gate, cameras installed in places Emma hadn't noticed before, protocols for who could come and go. It felt like living in a gilded cage, beautiful but confining. Catherine became an unexpected ally. She taught Emma the unspoken rules of Dominic's world, explaining which questions to ask and which to leave unspoken, how to read the tension in a room before violence erupted, how to maintain dignity when fear threatened to overwhelm. They had tea together in the afternoons, and Catherine shared stories about raising Dominic and his younger sister Lucia, painting a picture of a complicated family bound by loyalty and survival. It was during one of these afternoon teas that Emma finally asked the question that had been nagging at her since the night she arrived. "How did you do it? Live with the fear knowing your husband's enemies could come for you at any moment?" Catherine set down her teacup with precise care. "I learned to be useful. Not just a wife to be protected, but a partner who understood the business well enough to contribute. Knowledge is power, Emma, even in a world built on violence. Especially in a world built on violence. Did you ever think about leaving? Taking Dominic and Lucia and just disappearing? Every single day for the first 5 years of our marriage." Catherine's smile was sad. "But I loved my husband, and I understood that leaving him meant condemning him to a life alone in a world that devours the weak. So I stayed. I learned. I became the kind of woman who could stand beside him instead of cowering behind him." Emma absorbed this, thinking about her own situation. She'd spent her whole life fighting for independence, refusing to let anyone take care of her. But maybe independence wasn't the same as strength. Maybe real strength was knowing when to accept help and when to stand on your own. "I don't want to be helpless," Emma said quietly. "I don't want to be the weakness that gets Dominic killed." "Then don't be." Catherine's voice was firm. "You're carrying his child, yes. That makes you precious to him, worth protecting. But it doesn't make you weak unless you choose to be. Learn his world, understand the players and the rules, and become someone his enemies can't use against him." Before Emma could respond, Rosa appeared in the doorway. "Mrs. Russo, there's a young woman at the gate asking for Dominic. She says she's his sister." Catherine's expression brightened. "Lucia's home, finally." 20 minutes later, a whirlwind in designer jeans and a leather jacket swept through the front door. Lucia Russo was 28 but could have passed for younger, with dark hair like her brother's and eyes that missed nothing. She dropped her overnight bag in the foyer and immediately spotted Emma standing uncertainly near the stairs. "So you're the reason my brother has been acting like a crazy person for the past month," Lucia said, crossing the space between them with her hand extended. "I'm Lucia, and you must be Emma." Emma shook her hand, surprised by the warm smile. "Dominic told you about me?" "Dominic never tells me anything. He still thinks I'm 12 and need to be protected from the family business." Lucia rolled her eyes. "But I have my sources. And when my overprotective big brother suddenly starts beefing up security and asking Marco about exit strategies, I get curious." "Lucia," Catherine said with a warning tone, "perhaps let the poor girl breathe before you interrogate her." "I'm not interrogating. I'm being friendly." Lucia looped her arm through Emma's like they were old friends. "Come on. I want to hear everything. How you met, how you managed to crack my brother's terrifying exterior, all of it." Before Emma could protest, she was being led upstairs to Lucia's childhood bedroom, which had been preserved like a time capsule from her teenage years. Band posters on the walls, books stacked on every surface, a window seat overlooking the gardens. Lucia kicked off her shoes and sprawled across the bed. "Okay, spill. Because Dominic Russo doesn't do relationships. He does business transactions and one-night stands. So either you're the world's most effective manipulator, or my brother actually fell in love. And I need to know which." Emma sat carefully in the desk chair, unsure how much to reveal. "It's complicated. Everything involving my brother is complicated. Try me." There was something about Lucia's directness that put Emma at ease. She found herself telling the story, meeting Dominic at the restaurant, their one night together, finding out about the pregnancy, all of it spilling out in a rush of words. When she finished, Lucia was staring at her with wide eyes. "You're pregnant with Dominic's baby, and someone broke into your apartment looking for leverage against him." Lucia sat up. "Emma, do you understand how much danger you're in right now?" "I'm starting to," Emma admitted. "Your mother has been very educational about the risks." "I bet she has. Mom lived through an attempted kidnapping when I was 5. That's why Dominic is the way he is. He saw what it did to our father, how close we came to losing her." Lucia's expression turned serious. "Is that why he's asking Marco about exit strategies? Because of you and the baby?" Emma nodded. "He wants to go legitimate, build a life where our child isn't constantly in danger." "That's insane. You don't just walk away from this world. The families will see it as betrayal, weakness. They'll come after him." "I know. I tried to tell him he doesn't have to do this, but he's determined." Lucia was quiet for a long moment, studying Emma with an intensity that reminded her of Dominic. "He really loves you. I've never seen my brother willing to sacrifice everything for anyone, not even family." "I love him too," Emma said, the admission coming easier than she'd expected. "Which is why I'm terrified, because I don't want to be the reason he gets hurt or killed." "Then we need to make sure that doesn't happen." Lucia stood and paced to the window, her mind clearly working through possibilities. If Dominic is serious about going legitimate, he'll need allies. People within the organization who can support the transition and help protect him during the process. Do those people exist? Maybe. There are some younger members who've been pushing for modernization, wanting to move away from the more violent aspects of the business. If Dominic can build a coalition, present it as evolution rather than abandonment, he might have a chance. Lucia turned back to Emma. "But it's going to take time and careful planning. And in the meantime, you need to be smart about staying safe. Your mother said the same thing, that I need to learn the rules of this world." "Mom's right. Knowledge is survival." Lucia came back and sat beside Emma, her expression gentle. "I know this isn't the life you signed up for. But if you're going to be with my brother, if you're going to raise your child in the shadow of this world, you need to understand it, and I can help with that." Emma felt tears prick her eyes. She'd been so isolated since finding out about the pregnancy, carrying the weight alone even after telling Dominic. Having someone else, someone who understood the unique challenges she faced, felt like a lifeline. "Thank you," she whispered. Lucia squeezed her hand. "Welcome to the family, Emma. We're intense and complicated and sometimes terrifying, but we protect our own. And you're one of us now. That night, Dominic returned to the estate looking exhausted. Emma found him in his study, tie loosened and jacket discarded, staring at papers spread across his desk. She knocked softly on the doorframe. "Hey," she said. "Bad day?" Dominic looked up and his expression softened immediately. "Come here." Emma crossed to him and let him pull her into his lap, her head resting against his shoulder. They sat like that for a moment, just breathing together. "Marco identified who broke into your apartment," Dominic said finally. "Antonio Castellano hired them. He's trying to gather information to use against me in the next council meeting." "What happens at the council meeting?" "The families get together every quarter to discuss business, settle disputes, vote on major decisions. Antonio's been pushing for more aggressive expansion into territories I've been trying to keep neutral. If he can prove I'm weak or distracted, he'll use it to override my veto." Emma pulled back to look at him. "And me being pregnant makes you look weak?" "No, but it makes me look vulnerable." "Gives him leverage to demand concessions in exchange for leaving you alone." Dominic's jaw tightened, which is exactly why I'm not going to give him that chance. "What are you planning?" "I'm going to beat him to it. At the council meeting next week, I'm going to announce that I'm transitioning the family business toward legitimate operations, that I'm done with the violence and territorial disputes, and anyone who wants to continue down that path can do so without me." Emma's breath caught. "Dominic, that's dangerous, reckless, possibly suicidal." "I know." He cupped her face in his hands. "But I meant what I said, Emma. I'm not raising our child in this world. And if announcing my intentions publicly forces everyone's hand, makes them deal with it head on instead of plotting behind my back, then that's what I'm going to do." "What if they refuse? What if they see it as betrayal and come after you?" "Then I'll deal with it. But I won't hide anymore. Won't pretend this life is sustainable when I know it's going to destroy everything I care about." Emma searched his eyes and saw the determination there, the resignation. Dominic had made his choice, and nothing she said would change his mind. "When is the meeting?" she asked. "Saturday night, at the Belmont Hotel downtown." "I want to be there." Dominic went very still. "Absolutely not. It's too dangerous. If you're going to announce that you're leaving this life because of me and our baby, I should be there. Show them I'm not some weakness to exploit, but someone who stands beside you." Emma's voice was firm. "Your mother did it. Lucia told me about times when Catherine attended meetings to show support. I can do the same." "Emma, these men are not like the people you're used to dealing with. They're violent, unpredictable, and they're going to be part of our lives whether I hide from them or face them. I'd rather face them." She took his hands. "Let me be strong for you, Dominic, the way you've been strong for me." Dominic closed his eyes, clearly fighting an internal battle. When he opened them again, Emma saw resignation mixed with pride. "Okay," he agreed, "but you stay close to me at all times. And if I tell you to leave, you leave immediately. No arguments." "No arguments," Emma promised. The week leading up to the council meeting was tense. Dominic worked constantly, making calls and having meetings with various members of the organization. Marco came and went with updates on security arrangements and potential allies. Even Catherine seemed more alert, watching everything with sharp eyes. Lucia took it upon herself to prepare Emma for what to expect. They spent hours going over the major families, their relationships and rivalries, the personalities of the men who would be at the meeting. Lucia explained the subtle power dynamics, who deferred to whom, which alliances were strong and which were fracturing. "Antonio Castellano is the one you need to watch," Lucia said as they sat in the garden Thursday afternoon. "He's in his 50s, been in the business since he was a teenager. He sees Dominic as a threat because Dominic is smarter and more strategic. Antonio rules through fear and violence. Dominic rules through respect and intelligence. And that makes Antonio nervous." "Exactly. If Dominic succeeds in transitioning to legitimate business, it makes Antonio look like a dinosaur, so he'll fight it with everything he has." Lucia paused. "There's also Roberto Moretti. He's quieter than Antonio, but just as dangerous. He controls most of the gambling operations and has connections with politicians. If Dominic can get Roberto on his side, it would go a long way toward making the transition possible." Emma absorbed all of this, her head spinning with names and relationships. "How do you know all this?" I thought Dominic tried to keep you away from the business. Lucia smiled. My brother is overprotective, but he's not stupid. He knows I'm capable of handling myself. Besides, I have a degree in finance, and I've been helping Marco with the legitimate business operations for the past 2 years. Dominic just doesn't like to advertise that fact. So you're more involved than he wants to admit. Much more. And when he transitions fully to legitimate operations, I'll be running half of them. Lucia's eyes sparkled with ambition. This family needs to evolve, Emma. What worked for my grandfather's generation doesn't work anymore. The world has changed, and we need to change with it or die. Friday night, Dominic came to Emma's room after midnight. She was still awake, too anxious about the next day to sleep. He knocked softly and entered when she called out, still wearing his suit from whatever meeting he'd been at. "Can't sleep?" he asked. "Too much on my mind." Dominic crossed to the bed and sat on the edge. "Having second thoughts about tomorrow?" "About being there?" "No. About everything else?" "Maybe." Emma sat up, pulling the blankets around her. "Dominic, what happens if this doesn't work? If they refuse to let you go?" "Then we have a problem." He said it calmly, like he was discussing the weather rather than potential violence. "But I'll figure it out. I always do." "That's not reassuring." "I know." Dominic reached out and took her hand, threading his fingers through hers. "Emma, I need to tell you something, in case tomorrow doesn't go the way I hope." Fear spiked through her. Don't talk like something's going to happen to you. Listen to me. Please." He waited until she met his eyes. "If something happens to me, you go to Marco immediately. He has instructions to get you somewhere safe, somewhere my enemies can't find you. There's money set aside in accounts they can't touch, enough to take care of you and the baby for the rest of your lives." "Dominic, I need to know you'll be okay, that our child will be okay. Promise me, Emma. Promise me you'll let Marco protect you if I can't." Tears streamed down Emma's face. "I promise. But nothing's going to happen to you. We're going to get through this together." Dominic pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I love you. I need you to know that. From the moment I saw you in that restaurant, you've been the most important thing in my world. And finding out about the baby just confirmed what I already knew, that you're my future, the only future I want." "I love you too," Emma whispered against his chest. "So much it terrifies me." They stayed like that for a long time, wrapped in each other while the night deepened around them. Eventually, Dominic stretched out beside her on the bed, still fully clothed, and Emma curled into his side. She fell asleep listening to his heartbeat, steady and strong, and tried not to think about how fragile that heartbeat was. Saturday arrived with unseasonable warmth. Emma spent the morning with Catherine, who helped her choose what to wear, a simple black dress that was elegant without being ostentatious, paired with minimal jewelry. "You want to look dignified, but not trying too hard," Catherine explained as she fastened a pearl necklace around Emma's neck. "These men respect strength, but they're also traditionalists. Looking too modern or aggressive will put them on edge. I feel like I'm preparing for battle." "In a way, you are, just not the kind fought with weapons." Catherine met Emma's eyes in the mirror. "You're doing a brave thing, standing beside Dominic tonight. Most women would hide, would let the men handle it. But you're choosing to be visible, to show that you're a partner rather than a possession. That takes courage. Or stupidity. I haven't decided which yet." Catherine smiled. "Often, they're the same thing." Dominic came to collect Emma at 7. He looked devastating in a dark suit, his hair perfectly styled, every inch the powerful man the city feared. But when he looked at Emma, his expression softened into something tender. "You look beautiful," he said. "I look terrified." "That too, but beautifully terrified." He offered his arm. "Ready?" "No, but let's go anyway." The drive to the Belmont Hotel took 30 minutes through evening traffic. Marco drove while Vincent sat in the passenger seat, both men alert and watchful. Emma sat in the back beside Dominic, her hand clasped tight in his. "Remember," Dominic said quietly, "stay close to me. Don't engage with anyone directly unless they speak to you first. And if anything feels wrong, you tell me immediately." "I remember." The Belmont was an old hotel that had been renovated to maintain its historic charm while adding modern security features. They entered through a private entrance that led to a ballroom on the second floor. Guards stood at every access point, checking identification and searching for weapons. Inside the ballroom, round tables were arranged in a semicircle facing a raised platform. Men in expensive suits clustered in small groups, drinks in hand, conversations conducted in low voices. The atmosphere was tense, expectant. Emma felt every eye turned to her as she entered on Dominic's arm. Conversations faltered. The weight of their collective attention pressed down on her like a physical thing. Dominic led her to a table near the front, where Marco and Vincent already sat. Lucia appeared from somewhere, elegant in a navy dress, and took the seat beside Emma. "You okay?" Lucia whispered. "Ask me in an hour." Antonio Castellano was hard to miss. He stood near the bar, a thick-built man with silver hair and cold eyes, surrounded by what were clearly his enforcers. When he saw Dominic and Emma, his mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Russo," he called across the room, "I see you brought a guest. How unexpected." Dominic's expression didn't change. "Antonio, always a pleasure." "Is it?" Antonio crossed the space between them, his gaze fixed on Emma with uncomfortable intensity. "You going to introduce us? Or is she just decorative?" Emma felt Dominic tense beside her, but before he could respond, she found her voice. "Emma Clark," she said, meeting Antonio's eyes directly. "And I'm neither a guest nor decorative. I'm here because what happens tonight affects my future." Antonio's eyebrows rose. "Direct, I like that." He looked at Dominic. "She knows what you're planning to announce?" "She knows everything." "Brave woman, or foolish?" Antonio's smile was sharp. "We'll find out which soon enough." He walked away, leaving Emma's heart pounding in her chest. Lucia squeezed her hand under the table. "That was perfect," she whispered. "You didn't back down, but you didn't escalate. Well done." Other men approached their table over the next 20 minutes, some greeting Dominic with respect, others with barely concealed hostility. Emma stayed quiet, observing, noting the alliances and tensions Lucia had described. Finally, a man in his 60s stepped onto the platform and called the meeting to order. The room settled into silence as everyone took their seats. "We have several items on tonight's agenda," the older man began. "But first, Dominic Russo has requested time to make an announcement." "Dominic?" Dominic stood and Emma felt her breath catch. This was it, the moment that would determine everything. He walked to the platform with the confidence of a man who owned the room, even though Emma knew half the people there would happily see him dead. When he spoke, his voice carried clearly. "Gentlemen, I've called you here tonight because it's time for an honest conversation about the future of this organization. For 3 generations, the Russo family has been part of this council, contributing to our collective strength and prosperity. But the world has changed, and we need to change with it." Murmurs rippled through the room. Antonio leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, watching. "I'm announcing my intention to transition the Russo family operations toward fully legitimate businesses over the next 2 years," Dominic continued. "This means gradually stepping back from territories and operations that involve violence or illegal activities, and focusing instead on our legitimate holdings in real estate, construction, and finance." The murmurs grew louder. Someone called out, "That's abandonment of the family business." "It's evolution," Dominic countered. "The old ways are dying. Law enforcement is getting smarter, technology is making it harder to operate in the shadows, and the risks are becoming unsustainable. Those of you with children know this. Do you really want your sons and daughters inheriting a world where they're constantly looking over their shoulders?" "We've managed for decades," Antonio said, his voice cutting through the noise. "Your father managed. Your grandfather managed. What makes you think you're special?" Dominic met his gaze steadily. "I'm not special. I'm just smart enough to see what's coming. And I'm giving everyone here fair warning that the Russo family will no longer be participating in council business that involves illegal operations. You can continue without us, or you can consider following our lead. And if we don't want you to leave?" Antonio stood, his posture aggressive. "If we see your abandonment as betrayal? What then?" "Then we have a problem." Dominic's voice was calm but carried an edge of steel. "But I'm hoping you'll be reasonable. I'm not asking anyone else to change their operations. I'm simply stating my family's intentions and requesting that you respect our decision." "Respect," Antonio laughed, sharp and bitter. "You want respect for running away? For choosing some woman over your responsibilities to this organization? Emma felt every eye in the room turn to her. Her face burned, but she kept her expression neutral, channeling everything Catherine had taught her about dignity under pressure. "I'm not running away," Dominic said, his voice dangerous now. "I'm making a strategic decision based on what's best for my family's future. And yes, that includes the woman I love and the child she's carrying. But it's also about recognizing that this world is changing, and those who don't adapt will be left behind." The announcement of Emma's pregnancy sent a fresh wave of murmurs through the room. Dominic had just made their relationship and her condition public knowledge, removing any doubt about his intentions. Roberto Moretti stood from his table near the back. "Dominic, I respect your honesty, and I think you raise valid points about the changing landscape. But you're asking us to accept a major shift in power dynamics without any assurance that it won't weaken us all." "I'm offering to share our transition plan," Dominic said. "The legitimate businesses we're building, the political connections we're cultivating, the long-term strategy for sustainable wealth that doesn't rely on violence. Anyone interested in learning from our experience is welcome to that information." "And those of us who aren't interested," Antonio challenged, "those of us who think you're making a mistake? Then we go our separate ways, peacefully, with mutual respect for each other's choices." Dominic paused. "Unless you're planning to make this difficult, Antonio, in which case we have a different conversation." The threat was subtle but unmistakable. Emma's heart raced as she watched the two men face off, the entire room holding its breath. Antonio stared at Dominic for a long moment, then laughed. "You've got balls, Russo. I'll give you that. Walking in here, announcing you're going soft, bringing your pregnant girlfriend to a council meeting like this is some kind of family picnic." He shook his head. "But you're right about one thing. The world is changing. Question is whether you're changing with it or just running scared." "I guess time will tell," Dominic said evenly. Roberto spoke up again. "I propose we table any decision about Dominic's announcement until our next quarterly meeting. Give everyone time to consider the implications, and Dominic time to prove his transition plan is viable. All in favor?" Hands went up around the room, not everyone, but enough to carry the vote. "Opposed?" Antonio and a handful of others raised their hands, but they were the minority. "Motion passes," the older man on the platform said. "We'll revisit this discussion in 3 months. Dominic, you have until then to demonstrate progress on your transition plan. In the meantime, all council business continues as usual." Dominic nodded and stepped down from the platform. When he returned to the table, Emma could see the tension in his shoulders, the tightness around his eyes. The meeting had gone better than it could have, but it was far from over. The formal portion of the evening concluded, but people lingered, clustering in groups to discuss what had just happened. Dominic kept Emma close, his hand on the small of her back, as various members approached to offer support or thinly veiled threats. It was exhausting and terrifying, and Emma had never been more grateful for Lucia's presence beside her, translating the subtle meanings behind polite words. Finally, after nearly 2 hours, Dominic leaned down and whispered, "Ready to go?" "More than ready." They made their way toward the exit, Marco and Vincent falling into step behind them. Emma thought they were going to make it out without further incident. Then Antonio stepped into their path. "A word, Russo. In private." Dominic's jaw tightened. "Anything you have to say, you can say in front of Emma." "I don't think you want her to hear this. Try me." Antonio's smile was cold. "Fine. You think you can just walk away from this life, from the organization? You're deluding yourself. Blood in, blood out. That's always been the rule. And your blood has been in this organization since before you were born. Then I'll be the first to change that rule. Or you'll be the first to die trying." Antonio leaned closer. "You've made yourself vulnerable, Russo. Bringing that girl here, announcing she's carrying your child, showing everyone exactly how to hurt you. That was stupid." Dominic's expression went deadly. "If you or anyone else threatens Emma or my child, I will burn this entire organization to the ground. I will destroy everyone and everything you care about, and I will do it with a smile on my face. Are we clear?" The threat hung in the air between them, sharp and real. Emma held her breath, waiting for Antonio to respond with violence. Instead, he laughed. "There's the Russo I remember, the one who's willing to do whatever it takes." He stepped back. 3 months, Dominic. Prove you can make this transition work, or admit you were wrong and come back to the fold. But don't think for a second that you get to have it both ways. He walked away, leaving Dominic vibrating with controlled rage. "Let's go," Dominic said tightly. "Now." The drive back to the estate was silent. Emma sat pressed against Dominic's side, feeling the tension rolling off him in waves. When they finally pulled through the gates and into the circular drive, he helped her out of the car and led her directly to his study. Once inside with the door closed, Dominic paced like a caged animal. "I shouldn't have brought you there. That was reckless and stupid, and I put you in danger for no good reason." "You didn't force me to go," Emma said. "I chose to be there, and I'm glad I was. Those men needed to see that I'm real, that this isn't just some abstract decision you're making. They also needed to see that you're the key to destroying me if they want to." Dominic ran his hands through his hair, disheveling it. "Antonio's right. I made you a target tonight." "I was already a target. At least now they know you're serious about protecting me." Dominic stopped pacing and turned to face her. "I meant what I said. If anyone hurts you or our baby, I will destroy them. All of them. I don't care what it costs." Emma crossed to him and took his face in her hands, forcing him to meet her eyes. "I know, and I love you for it. But Dominic, you can't protect me by threatening to start a war. You protect me by following through on your plan, by building something legitimate and sustainable that gets us both out of this world." 3 months. Roberto gave me 3 months to prove it can work. "Then we have 3 months." Emma pressed her forehead against his. "We'll figure this out, together." Dominic's arms came around her, holding her so tight she could barely breathe. "I can't lose you, or our baby. You're everything to me, Emma. Everything." "You won't lose us. I promise." It was a promise Emma had no idea if she could keep, but standing in Dominic's study with his arms around her and their future hanging in the balance, she meant every word. They would find a way through this. They had to, because the alternative was unthinkable. The 3 months that followed the council meeting were the most intense of Emma's life. Dominic threw himself into the transition with single-minded determination, working 18-hour days to build legitimate business structures while gradually extracting the Russo family from illegal operations. Marco became a constant presence, helping to navigate the complex web of contracts and shell companies that had hidden criminal enterprises for decades. Emma's pregnancy progressed into the second trimester, and with it came a kind of clarity she hadn't expected. The morning sickness faded, replaced by energy and a fierce protectiveness for the child growing inside her. She started attending meetings with Dominic and Marco, learning the intricacies of the businesses they were building. Catherine had been right. Knowledge was power, and Emma was determined to be useful rather than simply protected. Lucia became her closest ally, teaching her how to read financial statements and identify the legitimate ventures that could sustain the family once the illegal revenue streams dried up. They spent afternoons in Dominic's study, surrounded by spreadsheets and business plans, building something that looked increasingly possible. But beneath the progress lurked constant danger. Antonio Castellano hadn't given up on undermining Dominic's transition. Twice, shipments to Russo-owned construction sites were sabotaged. Once, a fire broke out at one of their warehouses, destroying inventory worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Each incident bore Antonio's fingerprints, though nothing could be proven. Dominic responded with restraint that surprised even his own people. Instead of retaliating with violence, he documented every incident, gathered evidence, and prepared a case that would be presented at the next council meeting. He was building a narrative that Antonio's interference was destabilizing for everyone, not just the Russos. It was a dangerous gamble, one that required Dominic to appear strong while refusing to engage in the violence that had always been the language of his world. Emma watched him struggle with it every day. She saw the tension in his shoulders when reports of sabotage came in, the way his hands would curl into fists when Marco described Antonio's latest move. But Dominic never broke, never gave Antonio the satisfaction of seeing him revert to the old ways. "You're different," Emma told him one night in early May as they sat together in the estate's garden. She was 4 months pregnant now, just starting to show, and Dominic had taken to resting his hand on her stomach whenever they were alone. "Different how?" he asked. "Calmer, more controlled. The man I met in that restaurant was all intensity and barely leashed power. You've learned patience." Dominic's laugh was soft. "I've learned that losing my temper costs more than I'm willing to pay. Every time I want to go after Antonio to handle things the old way, I think about you, about our baby, about the future we're trying to build, and I remember that patience is the only weapon I have right now. It's working. I can see the difference in how people treat you. Even at the last business meeting, some of Antonio's allies were starting to question his tactics. Roberto especially. He's been calling me for advice on transitioning some of his gambling operations into legitimate entertainment venues. If I can get him fully on board before the next council meeting, we'll have the votes we need. Emma leaned into Dominic's warmth, feeling their child flutter inside her. The first movements she'd felt, delicate as butterfly wings. The baby just moved. Dominic's hand pressed more firmly against her stomach, his eyes wide. Really? Right there. Can you feel it? They sat in silence, waiting, and then it happened again, a soft rolling sensation that made Dominic's breath catch. That's our baby, he whispered, wonder transforming his face. That's our child, Emma. Yeah, she said, tears sliding down her cheeks. It is. In that moment, surrounded by the evening garden and the first stars appearing overhead, Emma felt something shift. This was why they were fighting so hard, why Dominic was willing to risk everything. Not for abstract concepts like legitimacy or safety, but for this. Quiet moments with their child. A future built on love instead of fear. The second council meeting arrived with spring turning to early summer. Emma was 5 months pregnant now, visibly showing despite the loose dress she wore. She'd argued with Dominic about attending again, but this time he'd put his foot down. Last time was about making a statement, he'd said firmly. This time is about business, and business can turn violent. You're staying here with my mother and Lucia. Emma had wanted to fight, but the protective instinct she felt for their baby was stronger than her pride. So she stayed at the estate while Dominic, Marco, and Vincent drove to the Belmont Hotel for the meeting that would determine their future. Catherine kept her company in the sunroom, both of them pretending to read while actually watching the clock. Lucia paced, her phone in hand, waiting for updates. How did you stand this? Emma asked Catherine. All those years waiting while your husband walked into danger? I learned to trust that he was good at what he did, that he'd been surviving in that world long before I met him. Catherine set down her book. And I learned that worrying doesn't change outcomes. It only makes the waiting harder. I don't know if I can be that calm. You will be. After the first 100 times, it gets easier. The words should have been reassuring. Instead, they reminded Emma that this might be her life forever. Waiting, worrying, wondering if Dominic would come home. Her phone buzzed with a text from Dominic. Meeting starting. I love you. Emma typed back, I love you too. Be safe. Then there was nothing to do but wait. At the Belmont Hotel, Dominic walked into the ballroom with Marco at his side and a file folder full of documentation under his arm. The room was packed. All the major families represented, plus some newer members Dominic hadn't seen at the last meeting. Roberto Moretti caught his eye and nodded. A good sign. Over the past 3 months, Roberto had become an unlikely ally, impressed by the Russo family's successful transition strategy. Antonio sat at his usual table, surrounded by his people, looking smug. Whatever he had planned, he clearly thought it was going to work. The meeting was called to order, and the first hour passed in routine business. Territory disputes resolved, new ventures approved, the usual mechanics of running a criminal organization. Then the chairman called for Dominic's progress report. Dominic stood and made his way to the platform, forcing himself to project confidence he didn't entirely feel. 3 months ago, I announced my family's intention to transition to fully legitimate operations. You gave me 90 days to prove it was viable. I'm here to report on our progress. He opened the folder and began walking through the details. The construction company that had landed 3 major city contracts, all above board and profitable. The real estate holdings they'd restructured into a legitimate development firm. The restaurant group they'd acquired and expanded. The security consulting business that employed former members of their organization in legal work. We've reduced our involvement in illegal operations by 70%, Dominic continued. The remaining 30% will be phased out over the next 6 months. Our revenue has actually increased during this period because legitimate businesses don't pay protection or operate on cash-only margins. And we've established political connections that will benefit not just the Russo family, but anyone here interested in following a similar path. Murmurs of interest rippled through the room. Several family heads leaned forward, clearly intrigued. Antonio stood abruptly. Very impressive presentation, Russo, but you're leaving out the most important detail. How much of this success came from pushing other families out of legitimate opportunities? None of it. Every contract we won was through competitive bidding. Every business we acquired was on the open market. Really? Because I have documentation here that says otherwise. Antonio pulled out his own folder. Evidence that you used your political connections to block Castellano bids on city contracts. That you pressured business owners to sell to you instead of to other interested parties. You're not going legitimate, Dominic. You're just finding new ways to maintain your power while pretending to be clean. Dominic's jaw tightened. He'd known Antonio would try something, but he hadn't expected outright fabrication. Those documents are falsified, he said calmly. Every deal I've made has been legitimate and can be verified through public records. Public records can be manipulated by someone with your resources and connections. Antonio addressed the room. Gentlemen, Dominic Russo is asking us to believe he's changed, that he's evolved beyond the violence and corruption that built his family's empire. But the truth is, he's just getting better at hiding it. And worse, he's doing it while making himself weak. His pregnant girlfriend is a liability that will get him killed. And when he falls, he'll take all of us down with him. The room erupted in arguing voices. Some supported Antonio, others defended Dominic. It was chaos, exactly what Antonio wanted. Roberto Moretti stood, and the room gradually quieted. Antonio raises an interesting point about verification. I propose we bring in an independent auditor to review the Russo family's business dealings over the past 3 months. If everything is as legitimate as Dominic claims, the audit will prove it. If there's corruption hidden beneath the surface, we'll know that too. Dominic felt a surge of relief. Roberto was giving him a way to prove his honesty without it turning violent. I accept that proposal. Full transparency, complete audit, everything available for review. Antonio's expression darkened. He clearly hadn't expected Dominic to agree so readily. And if the audit shows corruption, then I'll accept whatever consequences the council deems appropriate. Dominic met his gaze steadily. But it won't, because I've done everything exactly as I said, legally, ethically, and with full documentation. The vote was called. The majority approved Roberto's proposal. An independent auditor would be brought in, and the results would be presented at an emergency session in 30 days. It wasn't the clean victory Dominic had hoped for, but it was progress. Antonio had tried to discredit him and failed. Now there would be proof, undeniable documentation that the transition was working. After the meeting, Roberto pulled Dominic aside. That was bold, accepting the audit so quickly. I didn't have a choice, and besides, I have nothing to hide. I believe you, which is why I'm going to make you an offer. Roberto's expression was serious. The Moretti family wants to follow your model, not completely, but enough to legitimize 70% of our operations like you've done. I want your help making it happen. Dominic stared at him. You're serious? Dead serious? What you've built in 3 months is impressive, and I want the same stability for my family. My daughter is getting married next year, and I'd like to walk her down the aisle without wondering if I'll be arrested or killed before the ceremony. Roberto extended his hand. Partners? Dominic shook it, feeling hope surge through him. Partners. By the time Dominic returned to the estate, it was after midnight. He found Emma still awake in their bedroom, wearing one of his shirts and pacing despite the late hour. She turned when he entered, her face anxious. Well? It's not over, but it's progress. They're doing an independent audit of our business dealings. If it comes back clean, which it will, we'll have proof that the transition is working. And Roberto Moretti wants our help transitioning his family's operations too. Emma crossed to him and wrapped her arms around his waist, breathing in his scent like she was reassuring herself he was really there. No violence? Antonio tried to start something, but Roberto shut it down before it could escalate. Dominic held her close, one hand moving to rest on her stomach where their baby was growing. How's our little one? Active. Been kicking all evening like they know something important was happening. Dominic knelt and pressed his face to Emma's stomach, talking softly. Hey, baby. Your dad had a good night. We're one step closer to giving you the life you deserve. Just hang in there a little longer, okay? Emma ran her fingers through his hair, overcome with emotion. This man, this powerful, dangerous man, was on his knees talking to their unborn child with such tenderness it broke her heart. "I love you," she whispered. Dominic stood and kissed her, deep and thorough. "I love you too, both of you." The 30 days until the audit results were the longest of Emma's life. The auditor, a retired federal investigator with an impeccable reputation, spent weeks combing through every transaction, every contract, every business dealing the Russo family had conducted. Dominic provided complete access to everything, confident in his transparency. Emma used the time to prepare for the baby's arrival. She and Lucia transformed one of the estate's spare bedrooms into a nursery, painting walls a soft sage green and filling the space with furniture that would keep their child safe and comfortable. Catherine contributed family heirlooms, an antique cradle that had held 3 generations of Russo babies, blankets hand-knitted by Dominic's grandmother. It felt like building a future, making something real and permanent instead of temporary and fragile. Dr. Mitchell confirmed at the 20-week ultrasound that they were having a girl. Dominic had cried when he saw his daughter's face on the screen, had held Emma afterward and whispered promises about the life he would give their child. "She'll never know violence," he'd said. "Never grow up afraid. I swear it, Emma." Emma believed him. After everything they'd been through, all the risks he'd taken to build something better, she believed he would do whatever it took to keep that promise. The emergency council session was scheduled for a Saturday in late June. This time, Emma didn't argue about staying home. She was 6 months pregnant and moving slower, the baby pressing on her ribs and making long periods of standing uncomfortable. She kissed Dominic goodbye and settled in the sunroom with Catherine and Lucia to wait. "This is it," Lucia said, checking her phone obsessively. "The audit results will either vindicate Dominic completely or give Antonio ammunition to force him out." "They'll vindicate him," Emma said with more confidence than she felt. "Dominic did everything right. There's nothing to find." Catherine squeezed her hand. "Even if there is, we'll handle it. This family has survived worse than Antonio Castellano." At the Belmont Hotel, Dominic sat with Marco and Roberto while the chairman called the meeting to order. The auditor, a severe woman named Patricia Chen, stood at the platform with a thick report in her hands. "I've completed my investigation into the Russo family's business dealings over the past 4 months," she began, her voice crisp and professional. "I've reviewed financial records, interviewed business partners, examined contracts, and traced money flows. My findings are comprehensive and documented in this report." The room was silent, everyone waiting. In summary, I found no evidence of corruption, coercion, or illegal activity in any of the Russo family's recent business transactions. Every contract was awarded through legitimate competitive processes. Every business acquisition was conducted at fair market value with willing sellers. Every political connection was disclosed and operated within legal boundaries. Patricia looked directly at Antonio. The allegations presented at the last meeting were unfounded and unsupported by any evidence I could find. Relief crashed through Dominic so powerfully he felt lightheaded. Beside him, Marco let out a breath he'd been holding. Antonio shot to his feet. "That's impossible. I have sources that confirmed." "Your sources were either misinformed or lying," Patricia interrupted coldly. "I'm a professional investigator with 30 years of experience. I know fabricated evidence when I see it. The documents you presented at the last meeting were forgeries designed to discredit Mr. Russo. If this council operates with any integrity, you should be sanctioned for attempting to manipulate the proceedings." The room erupted in chaos. Antonio's face went purple with rage as other family heads turned on him, demanding explanations. The chairman called for order, his voice barely audible over the shouting. Roberto stood, and the room gradually quieted. "I move that we accept the auditor's findings as definitive proof that Dominic Russo's transition to legitimate operations is successful and should be supported by this council. Furthermore, I move that any family wishing to pursue a similar path should be allowed to do so without interference." "Seconded," called another voice from the back. The vote was overwhelming. Only Antonio and 2 of his closest allies voted against. Everyone else supported the motion. Dominic stood, his heart pounding. "Thank you. This council's support means everything to my family. And to anyone interested in transitioning their operations, I'm offering complete transparency into our process. We can all evolve together, build something sustainable that protects our families while moving away from the violence that's destroyed too many lives. After the meeting, as people filed out, Antonio approached Dominic one last time. His face was hard, but some of the fire had gone out of his eyes. "You won," Antonio said flatly. "But don't think this is over. You've set a precedent that weakens everything this organization was built on." "No," Dominic said quietly. "I've set a precedent that shows we can change without losing everything. That's not weakness, Antonio. That's survival." Antonio stared at him for a long moment, then walked away without another word. Roberto clapped Dominic on the shoulder. "You did it. Actually pulled it off." "We did it," Dominic corrected. "Your support made all the difference." "Well, now I need your help making it work for my family. When can we start?" "Monday morning. Come by my office and we'll go through everything." Dominic left the Belmont feeling lighter than he had in months. The hardest battle was won. The council had accepted his transition, even endorsed it. Antonio's attempts to undermine him had failed. They had a real chance now, a real future. He couldn't wait to tell Emma. He found her in the nursery, arranging stuffed animals on a shelf while Lucia handed her items from a box. Both women turned when he entered, their faces anxious. "Well?" Emma asked. "The audit cleared us completely. Antonio's evidence was proven to be fabricated. The council voted to support the transition." Dominic crossed to Emma and pulled her into his arms, mindful of her pregnant belly. "We won, Emma. We actually won." Emma burst into tears, clutching him tight. "It's really over? We're safe?" "The immediate threat is over. Antonio doesn't have the support to move against us anymore, and Roberto's bringing other families on board with the transition. We're building something real, something that will last." Lucia hugged them both, laughing and crying. "I can't believe it actually worked. Dominic, you just changed the entire landscape of organized crime in this city." "Not me. Us. All of us." Dominic kissed Emma's forehead, then her lips. "We did this together." That night, Dominic took Emma to the place where his life had started. Not the family estate, but a small apartment above a bakery in the old neighborhood where his grandfather had first arrived in America. The bakery was closed now, shuttered for decades, but Dominic had keys. He led Emma up narrow stairs to a modest apartment that had been preserved exactly as it was in the 1940s. Simple furniture, faded curtains, walls covered in photographs of people Emma didn't recognize but whose faces bore resemblance to Dominic's. "My grandfather came here with nothing but dreams and determination," Dominic said, walking through the small space. "He worked in this bakery, saved every penny, and eventually bought it. He wanted to build something honest, something he could be proud of. But the neighborhood was controlled by organized crime, and they made it impossible for him to operate without paying protection. So he made a deal, joined the organization in exchange for safety for his business and his family." Emma listened, understanding flooding through her. "And that's how your family got involved?" "Yeah. One compromise to protect what mattered, and it spiraled into 3 generations of violence and corruption." Dominic turned to face her. "But my grandfather never forgot his original dream. This apartment, this bakery, it represented everything he wanted before the world forced him to become something else. My father used to bring me here when I was a kid, tell me stories about the life Grandpa had imagined." "Why are you showing me this?" "Because this is what I want for our daughter. Not the empire I inherited, but the dream my grandfather started with. Honest work, family, a life built on something real." Dominic took Emma's hands. "I've been thinking about buying this building, restoring the bakery, making it a working business again, something our daughter could run someday if she wanted. A legacy that's about creation instead of destruction." Tears streamed down Emma's face. "Dominic, that's beautiful. I want our child to know where she came from, but also to have choices I never had, to build her own life instead of inheriting mine." He pulled Emma close, resting his hand on her stomach. "I want to be the father my grandfather would have been proud of. The man you deserve." "You already are," Emma whispered. "You've changed everything, risked everything, to give us a better life. You're already the man I need." They stood in the quiet apartment, surrounded by the ghosts of dreams deferred but not forgotten, and Emma felt their future crystallize into something real and possible. They would restore this bakery, would raise their daughter with stories of the man who'd started with nothing and dreamed of something better. would build a life that honored the past while creating something new. 3 months later, Emma went into labor on a crisp October morning. Dominic rushed her to the hospital where Dr. Mitchell was waiting, and after 12 hours of intense labor, their daughter came into the world screaming with impressive lung power. "She's perfect," Dominic whispered, holding the tiny bundle with trembling hands. "Emma, she's absolutely perfect." Emma, exhausted and overwhelmed, watched her daughter yawn and settle into Dominic's arms like she belonged there. "What should we name her?" They'd discussed names for months without deciding, wanting to meet their daughter first. Now, looking at her delicate features and dark hair, Emma knew. "Sophia," she said, "after your grandfather." Dominic's eyes filled with tears. "Sophia Rose Russo. You want to use my last name?" "I want to." Emma reached out to touch her daughter's soft cheek. "She's a Russo, part of this family and everything we're building." Catherine and Lucia arrived an hour later bearing flowers and gifts and tears of joy. Catherine held her granddaughter with practiced ease, cooing softly in Italian, while Lucia took approximately 100 photos. "She looks like you," Catherine told Dominic. "Same serious expression, even as a newborn." "Let's hope she doesn't inherit my temper," Dominic said, unable to take his eyes off his daughter. Marco and Vincent stopped by briefly, bringing a massive teddy bear and congratulations. Even Roberto sent flowers with a note promising to spoil Sophia at every opportunity. Emma watched her daughter being passed around, welcomed into a family that would protect her fiercely, and felt a contentment she'd never known was possible. 6 months ago, she'd been terrified and alone, burning a pregnancy test and hoping the problem would disappear. Now she was surrounded by people who loved her, holding a daughter who was the most precious thing in her world, and planning a future built on hope instead of fear. The first year of Sophia's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming joy. Dominic proved to be an attentive father, changing diapers at 3 in the morning and walking the floor with a fussy baby without complaint. He reduced his work hours, delegating more to Marco and Lucia, determined to be present for every milestone. The bakery restoration project moved forward steadily. Dominic hired contractors to update the building while preserving its historical character, and worked with a master baker to develop recipes that honored his grandfather's original creations. The grand opening was scheduled for Sophia's first birthday. Emma finished her degree through online classes, studying during Sophia's nap times and late at night when Dominic took over baby duty. She graduated with honors and immediately started working with Lucia on the legitimate business operations, bringing her fresh perspective and business education to the growing empire. The Russo family's transition continued smoothly. The last of their illegal operations were shut down or transferred to other families who wanted to maintain them. Roberto Moretti successfully transitioned 60% of his businesses, and 3 other families followed suit, creating a coalition of legitimate operations that dominated the city's business landscape. Antonio Castellano remained bitter and hostile, but without support from other families, he posed no real threat. His influence waned as the organization evolved, and eventually he retired to Florida, leaving his son to navigate the changing landscape. On Sophia's first birthday, the Russo family gathered at the restored bakery for the grand opening. The old neighborhood had turned out in force, curious about the return of a business their grandparents remembered. The storefront gleamed with fresh paint. The ovens filled the air with the scent of baking bread, and Sophia toddled around in a frilly dress, delighting in the attention. Dominic stood behind the counter with Emma at his side, serving the first customers from his grandfather's original recipes. His hands, which had once signed orders that ended lives, now measured flour and kneaded dough. His focus, which had once been consumed by territory and power, now centered on creating something beautiful and simple. "Your grandfather would be proud," Catherine said, sampling a pastry. "This is exactly what he dreamed of." "I hope so," Dominic said quietly. He looked at Emma, at Sophia giggling in Lucia's arms, at the community gathering in celebration. "I hope he knows that his dream didn't die. It just took a few generations to come true." Emma slipped her hand into his and squeezed. They'd come so far from that night in the restaurant parking lot when she'd been terrified of a dangerous man and the life he represented. Now that man was her husband, the father of her child, and the person she trusted most in the world. He'd changed for her, had risked everything to build something better. And in doing so, he'd become the person he was always meant to be. Not the ruthless crime boss the city feared, but the man his grandfather had hoped his descendants would become. That evening, after the bakery closed and the family gathered for a private celebration, Dominic raised a glass of champagne. "To Sophia," he said, looking at his daughter who was falling asleep in Emma's arms. "May she grow up in a world we made better. May she never know the violence that defined our past. And may she always know that she was loved enough to change everything." "To Sophia," everyone echoed, glasses clinking together. Emma looked around the table at the family she'd gained. Catherine's wisdom and strength, Lucia's friendship and support, Marco's quiet loyalty, even Rosa, who'd become like a second mother. This was what she'd been searching for all those years she'd struggled alone, working herself to exhaustion just to survive. Not wealth or power, but belonging. Family. Love that was fierce and protective and unconditional. Later that night, after everyone had gone home and Sophia was asleep in her crib, Emma and Dominic stood on the balcony of their bedroom at the estate. The city spread below them, lights twinkling in the darkness, and Emma thought about how different her life looked now from the path she'd imagined. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked Dominic. "Giving up the power, the empire you inherited?" Dominic pulled her closer, his arms wrapping around her from behind, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Never. Not for a single second. Everything I gave up was worth it for this, for you, for Sophia, for the life we're building together. Even when it was hard, when Antonio was fighting you, when the council doubted you, especially then, because those were the moments that proved what really mattered. And it was never the power or the empire, Emma. It was always this: family, love, a future worth fighting for." He turned her in his arms to face him. "You gave me that. You and Sophia. You gave me a reason to become someone better." Emma reached up to cup his face, her thumb brushing across his cheekbone. "We gave each other a reason. I was drowning before I met you, working myself to death just to survive. You showed me what it meant to be cherished, protected, loved. You taught me that accepting help wasn't weakness, and that real strength comes from knowing when to be vulnerable." They kissed as the city lights glittered below, two people who'd found each other against impossible odds and built something beautiful from the wreckage of the past. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy. There would be challenges, setbacks, moments when the old world tried to pull them back. But they would face it together, with their daughter sleeping peacefully in the nursery and a future that held more promise than fear. Emma had burned that pregnancy test believing she was destroying evidence of a mistake. Instead, she'd lit a fire that transformed everything: her life, Dominic's empire, the future of everyone they loved. Those two pink lines she'd tried to erase had led to this moment, standing in the arms of the man she loved, with a daughter who represented hope instead of fear. It hadn't been easy. It hadn't been safe. But it had been worth every terrifying, overwhelming, beautiful moment. And as Emma rested her head against Dominic's chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart, she knew with absolute certainty that she would make the same choice again, every single time. Because sometimes the biggest mistakes lead to the most precious gifts. Sometimes burning the evidence doesn't destroy the future. It illuminates the path forward. And sometimes love is worth risking everything.